Good evening. Welcome to the Education and Pupil Services and Finance and Operations Virtual Committee meetings for February 23rd, 2021. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The meeting of the Education and Pupil Services Committee will please come to order. Roll call, please. Mr. Board Secretary, Mr. Rogers. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Haig?
I'm here and I can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Desnoyers?
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Warsavage?
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Neal?
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Mrs. Dawes?
I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Fields?
I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Mrs. Mitchell?
I'm here.
Mrs. Curry? Mr. Brown?
I am here. During this unprecedented time, while social distancing requirements are in place, the Upper Darby School District needs to continue certain aspects of its business, which includes decisions concerning pandemic planning. For this reason, the Upper Darby School District will continue regularly scheduled school board meetings while pandemic-related restrictions imposed by Governor Wolf and any local authorities are still in place. It is the plan of the school board to hold these meetings with the minimum required departures from normal operating procedures. The Upper Darby School District School Board COVID-19 Special Operating Procedures document outlines expected departures from those normal operating procedures and the policy justifications for such departures. At the start of each committee meeting held while pandemic-related restrictions are in place, the board will review the departures from normal operating procedures as well as their justifications. While social distancing requirements are in place, the Upper Darby School District School Board finds it necessary to hold virtual school board and school board committee meetings to complete required business. These virtual meetings will allow for public viewing and participation. Following practices already in place for regular meetings, all virtual school board meetings, in addition to allowing near real-time public viewing and participation, will be recorded and the recordings made available after the meeting. In order to hold virtual school board meetings, adjustments need to be made following existing board policy. These adjustments have been outlined in the Upper Darby School District School Board COVID-19 Special Operating Procedures. Dr. McGarry, can you provide specific information on how the public can participate in tonight's meeting, sir?
Yes, during the pandemic and previously to the pandemic, the school board has always made every effort to engage with the public, and we have continued that through this virtual process. This evening, if you would like to participate, you may send in a question to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Again, committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Or you can phone them in at 610-789-7200, extension 2000. We ask that you please leave your name, your address, and it's very important that you provide the agenda item you'd like to ask a question or comment on this evening. Before the board moves forward in consideration to bringing any of these items that are board actionable items to the next meeting, they will certainly take your comments and questions into play this evening. We will also try to address any questions that we can. Again, please feel free to submit your questions at committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org or 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Again, very important, name, address, and the agenda item you'd like to leave a comment or question for. And we'll provide an update throughout the evening. Thank you, Board President Brown.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. The following motion shall be applicable for tonight's committee meetings. Policy 003 allow the board to suspend policies or parts of policies when appropriate. Therefore, due to the current ongoing crisis, I make the following motions to suspend language in 2 of the board's policies until the next regularly scheduled meeting. Policy 006.1, which regulates attendance at meetings via electronic communications, I move to suspend the language requiring board members to be present. Specifically, The language would be, a majority of board members shall be physically present at a board meeting when a board member attends through electronic communications. In Policy 006, which governs other requirements of board meetings, I move the suspension of language requiring that those members of the public wishing to participate be present. Specifically, the language in the section titled Public Participation will remove the words that read, present at a board meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Leah Dawes, I second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, please say I oppose and state your name for the record. Anyone abstaining, please say I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carries. I will now turn over the Education and Pupil Services Committee agenda to Co-Chair Mrs. Mitchell. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Mr. Marshallek, will you begin with a review of the agenda items? And I'm not sure, I'm having some feedback.
Sure. So tonight we have 5 agenda items, the first of which is the adoption of instructional online resources. There are 2 parts to this, one being Albert I.O. for our high school students, and the second is Naviance for our students in elementary schools, grades 3 and 4 and 5. This is for board action tonight. The second agenda item is adoption of secondary English language learner textbooks. Ms. Eileen Caruso, our ELL coordinator, will present an overview of new textbooks for our middle school and high school students, our EL students. Again, this is for board action. Agenda item number 3 is informational. It is a review of the Upper Darby High School scheduling project. Mr. Tim Lambert and Mr. James Finch provide an update to the board and the public about the process so far to date. And again, this is a review from the last presentation in December at the Education and Pupil Services Committee meeting. Fourth agenda item is also informational. It's COVID Compensatory Services, or CCS. I'll provide a short overview of the process that the district will meet the recommendation from the Department of Education to provide a remedy for those students with IEPs who may have been impacted by the shutdown last school year. And last are our policies. We have 3 policies tonight. Policy 103, discrimination, Title IX, sexual harassment affecting students. Policy 200, enrollment of students. And policy 218.3, which is action and placement of students convicted or adjudicated of sexual assault.
Thank you so much. Can you begin with agenda item number 1, the adoption of the instructional online resources, please?
Sure. So I'll turn the first part of this over to Ms. Christine Kelly, our Director of Curriculum, to discuss the Albert I.O.
Good evening, everyone. So tonight we are seeking approval to move forward an online tool called Albert I.O. For our Upper Darby high school students, particularly our AP students. Albert, or Albert I.O., and what people are probably thinking are, what does I.O. stand for? So it is the domain for this platform, and it's used commonly in technology, gaming, and some startup firms. So that is the reason for the I.O. in this. I was not positive of that when I started down this journey, so I wanted to make sure everybody realized what was going on. So again, this is for our AP students at the high school. Next slide, Mr. Marshallek, please. So what does Albert I.O. do, or what does Albert do? Albert is an online practice tool. It helps prepare our AP students. At one point, many students used to sign up for an AP course, or they used to go and seek tutoring for an AP exam. What this does is provides all of those updated questions for our students. It's a tutoring tool to get our students prepared for the AP exam that they take in May, depending on the courses that they're scheduled for, of course, in the high school. So that is what Albert I.O. or Albert does to help prepare our students. The next slide here shows some results. So Albert has been deemed appropriate for preparing our students. It's in the national AP exam. Pass rate averages about 14%, and you'll see that people that have been using it, or students that have been using it, have seen an increase in their AP scores. So AP biology, 14%, AP Literature or English Literature 25%, and so on and so forth on this slide. So you'll see by practicing and using and getting used to the types of questions that are on the AP exam that students are finding greater success when taking the test at the end of their courses. Last slide, please. So the benefits to our students, the subscription offers access to all College Board AP subjects. So although the students may only be rostered in an AP English or a math course or whatever courses they are rostered in, they do get access to all of the exams or all of the practice items that are there. There's no paying now for the students, so they don't have to pay to take a practice exam. They don't have to seek out a tutor or anything like that. This program would do it for them. There are some free response questions where students can evaluate their answers, and Albert's sample responses and rubrics help them on that journey of knowing what is right and appropriate and everything else here. So this package would be a 3.5-year implementation. The company is allowing us to, if approved in March, to allow our students to begin use right away. So it would cost the district $13,000 for the remainder of for the remainder of this half of year, and then into the next 3 years. We would like to pay for this out of CARES funding, so it would not be an impact to the district. However, we do find it to be very beneficial. The reason that we're bringing it forward is our AP teachers brought it forward to Ms. Kenya, also to Mr. Schwartz. They were looking for something else to help our students and prepare our students and to give them that alternate experience with answering those types of questions and to really get a feel for the wording and everything like that. So that is the reason that this program has come about at this point. Other districts are using it in the area. There's quite a few that I could provide if anybody needs those, and some very local districts that have had some tremendous success with it. So that's the end of this presentation. It was very short, and if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Ms. Buford, are there any questions from board members on the first part of this agenda item?
I don't see that any board members would like to ask a question or have a comment.
If you have a question after we get through the second one, it should be fine as well. I'm sure Mrs. Kelly will take your questions.
Absolutely.
So the next, Mr. Neal.
I apologize. Mr. Neal has a question.
Okay, Mr. Neal, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Haig. Ms. Kelly, is there a limit to how many students can participate in this program, or is it unlimited for our district?
No, that's a great question. So we are buying subscriptions for the number of students that are enrolled and typically enrolled in the AP courses. We have 200 licenses that would be that we would be purchasing for the remainder of this school year and into the next school years, and those are fluid, meaning if Christine Kelly graduates this year, then next year another person could take Christine Kelly's license. So they are fluid in that regard, but we do have 200 licenses purchased for this.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we can move on to the next section of this agenda item.
Okay, the next part is proposal to expand Naviance to our elementary grades in grades 3 through 5. Currently, right now, just way some background, we have Naviance that we utilize in our secondary schools for artifact collection, college and career readiness, and those standards required by the Department of Education. We have an opportunity using, some of the ESSER money that we have available to us. And again, this is an idea brought by Ms. Wendy Elgart, who oversees this aspect of student services directly, to expand this product into our elementary grades. Formerly, in the past, we used something called Career Zone that we found to be somewhat, not so much user-friendly with our younger students, and it became even less, useful when we were in our virtual environment during the pandemic. So we took a temporary 1-year pause to review and take a look at how we would move forward with our artifact collection for our grades 3 through 5. and also, to try to build some cohesiveness with our programs in our secondary schools. So we feel that Naviance fits very nicely. I'll go through some of the benefits in the next couple of slides. And again, to begin, the biggest, point that we're looking to is to build this connection between, our secondary schools and our elementary schools, in particular for the college and education and workforce standards. Start beginning the career exploration early on in our elementary age students. In addition, we want to build that connection so students are familiar with this tool when they head into middle school in sixth grade. They have some background, they have some additional use when they're in elementary grades, in addition to also building their portfolio of artifacts over the course of time and keep it in one place throughout their time as a district student. And again, as I mentioned, it would collect and would house our artifacts to meet the CW requirements or standards from the Department of Education, providing that continuity across our grade levels, be a one-stop shop for all of our requirements, and then also making it much easier for our requirement under PIMS, the Pennsylvania Information Management System, and that reporting we do every year as part of the Future PA Ready Index. And again, students who, beginning in third grade, if they remain with us through 12th grade, they'll have one log-on from third grade to 12th grade. The parents can also access for involvement at home to review what students are reviewing in school, and they can have play an active role in their career exploration over their career here in Upper Darby School District. The cost, as I mentioned, where we like to cover this through the ESSER funding. We're looking at a 5-year contract, which would also align with the renewal of our 6 through 12 contract. So it'd be a total cost of $47,580 to include also professional development in years 1 and year 2. This is maybe about $7,000 or $8,000 more than what we were spending on Career Zone about a year and a half ago. So we believe it's a good opportunity and a good a benefit to our district for the little bit of increase in cost for the 5-year contract. And as I mentioned, the first 2 years will be covered with professional development by Naviance to our district employees and our administrators, and then continued professional development moving on throughout the course of our usage of the tool by Ms. Elgart and our student service staff, counselors, and other members of our team. Again, another short presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that go along with this expansion of Naviance to grades 3 through 5.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak. Are there any board members that have questions? Ms. Buford?
We have a question from Dr. Haig, followed by Mr. Warsavage.
Okay, Dr. Haig?
Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell and Mr. Marshallak. Mr. Marshallak, can you just clarify for those of us whose kids are younger and haven't been part of any of this, what you mean when you say artifacts? So I'm envisioning maybe like surveys on the kids' interests or something, just to give us some vague idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a great question. I apologize for not being clear with that. So the artifact is a term that they use, the Department of Education uses as, and I think you hit it right in the head, a survey is a good example. Students would respond to what they learned as part of the CEW standards. So for example, we have in our elementary grades, really throughout our district, we have College Sweatshirt Day, where all of our staff, wear the college they like to promote for our students to provide that awareness. Students get to ask questions, and teachers will provide a lesson on why they went to college, where they went to college, and how they furthered their education. And students have an opportunity to reflect on what they learned from their teacher, and they would do it in the form of any type of product or a survey or any type of reflection piece that the students would do in the classroom. And we're required to maintain those and keep those per the Department of Education as to show proof if we're ever monitored on our CEW standard artifact collection to show evidence that we did complete these tasks. So this would be a place or a data warehousing opportunity for us to house those artifacts within Naviance. So it could be as simple as a survey. It could be much more in depth, like an interest survey or some type of higher level reflection or essay or other type of work product.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak. That helps.
Mr. Warsavage?
Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell, and great presentation, Mr. Marshallak. I did have a couple of, data-oriented questions. First one was, would the profile remain with the student if they say were with us for this program in third grade, maybe went to a different set of middle schools and then returned to the high school for 9th through 12th grade? Also, another question in regards to that, how easy would it be for people? I know there was one login that is maintained throughout their career here, but is it easy enough for parents or students to be able to retrieve their login, normal things like that, so that people feel more comfortable using this program, because it sounds awesome?
Right, thank you. So I'll answer the second question first. They do have a reset option and a password retrieval, aspect of for Naviance. We also have, wonderful, IT department led by Mr. Helinski, who would also be able to assist families with resetting their password or recovering any information that they might need. The first question is, so that the students would build a profile over their time with us as district student, which is one of the benefits that we felt with this program. And things do change over time. So students might have different, career, aspirations or interests that they will develop. It's unrealistic for us to think a third grader is going to know what they want to do when they get to high school or beyond high school. But within this tool, you can track their different their paths along the way. And as they become older in our secondary schools, they can really hone in on what their interests are, what their desires, tend to be, and what they look forward, to do in the future. Does that answer your question, Mr. Borsavich?
Kind of, sort of. That's actually more in depth than I anticipated, which is even better. So that's awesome. But my question was referring to, say, someone went to Aronimink Elementary from 3rd to 5th grade, then went to a Catholic school for 6th through 8th grade, then transitioned back into the district for 9th through 12th. Would the district still maintain that old profile? Would they have to create a brand new one? How would that work?
Right, understood. I mean, I will find the exact answer to that to be sure. I'm almost positive that we do still warehouse and collect that information, the artifacts. We do maintain them. In the event that students do transition back to one of our schools, they would have the history of their artifacts that we would maintain. There's still a requirement of us to produce those artifacts and maintain those, regardless if students transfer out or transfer into our school district.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Mr. Marshallak, if I could just add, the licenses can go inactive. So if a student does transfer in and out of the school district, which we do see at the middle school and high school, the license can go inactive, and then when a student returns, we can reactivate the license. It does save the file for that student.
I see Mr. Brown, President Brown has a question as well.
Just a brief one. I think you mentioned this, but I wanted to talk about the funding source. I think you covered this. How would it be paid?
Right. So there would be the ESSER funds or the CARES funding.
The CARES. Okay.
Yeah, based upon the pandemic and the money we're receiving from the government to offset some costs and provide support.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Marshall, I do have one question. With the Career Zone product that we saw, I don't know, 18 months ago or something, it was very user-friendly for kids. They had cute little videos. What is this like for our younger students?
So it's, and again, it's similar in the sense that it has the elementary type, products and videos and usage that would be appealing to an elementary student. Like I said, the benefit with this versus Career Zone is that it's much more user-friendly for the teacher and for the parent, for the student to eventually be able to contribute to. But it does still have the appeal for an elementary age student. It is geared, and they do adjust based upon. It wouldn't be the same middle school or high school model that you would see for an elementary student.
So it's age appropriate.
Exactly.
Basically. Okay.
Correct.
That's really what I wanted to know. But also, we're required to collect these, what they call artifacts. So if you could just briefly touch on that requirement for the people that are watching at home.
Sure. So again, as I mentioned, part of the CEW standards from the Department of Education, Career Education and Workforce Standards, we have to teach our students and expose them to different standards throughout the course of their career here in school districts, just like we would for reading, for math, science, social studies. And part of what the Department of Education requires us is to collect evidence that we do meet those standards and expose students to this variety of standards throughout their career. And in each year, especially in our elementary age students, they have to collect 2 artifacts per year. And they're cumulative over time. So as they leave 5th grade, they're expected to have 6 artifacts. And again, we have benchmarks set up throughout the year. We do try to do 1 artifact collection in the fall and 1 in the spring. But there's also other opportunities to collect additional artifacts as students do additional assignments or lessons, throughout their exposure to in Naviance or whatever the teacher may choose to do for CW standards.
I just appreciate you sort of fleshing that out. It sort of got breezed over in the slides. Ms. Buford, do we have any other comments from
For
or
board
questions?
members, no, but Superintendent McGarry would like to make a comment.
Go ahead, Dan.
Two pieces, as Mr. Marshalak explained that, and back to Mr. Warsavage's comment. The other unique feature, I know Mr. Lambert's on this call, is that when we collect these artifacts every single year, we have to report them to PIMS, Pennsylvania Information Management System, that each year the artifacts have to be shown to the state to have been collected. So not only is there a system where we collect it internally, we have to report it to the state. So the student record would then be followed. So when they return back to Pennsylvania schools, they have what's called a PA Secure ID, a Pennsylvania ID. That ID remains with that student. When that student, if they should return back to public schools, that ID would come up, and then we would have the PIMS information that would let us know that the artifacts were collected. Also, interestingly enough, Power School recently purchased Naviance, and Power School is also the owner of our learning management system here in the school district. So it's another unique aspect of these features tying together. They'll work with our learning management systems.
Mrs. Mitchell, may I add
Thank
one
you.
other thing?
Yes.
Also, as part of the way we include this for the state is it is recorded on the Future Ready Index. So as part of the Future Ready Index in 5th grade, you'll see it in 8th grade, and then you'll get to see it in the high school. So we have to, those artifacts that we keep referring to are part of the school the Future Ready Index.
Great. Mrs. Buford, are there any other questions or comments from board members?
Ms. Mitchell, there are no more comments or
Okay.
questions.
Dr. McGarry, could you just review really quick for those who might have joined after our initial thing, how they participate in tonight's meeting? And then we'll move on to agenda item number 2.
Yeah, certainly, and we appreciate anybody who has a comment or a question to send it in to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org or at 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Very important that you leave your name and address and the specific agenda item that you'd like to leave a comment or question on. It's important that we are able to have that process follow while we're virtual so the board and the team here can make sure that we're responding to the appropriate agenda item that you have a comment or question on.
Thank you. And we'll be taking public comments and questions at the end of the meeting. And who will need to respond will be able to do that. So agenda item number 2, the adoption of textbook secondary English learners.
So this time I'd like to invite Ms. Eileen Caruso, our ELL coordinator.
Mr. Marshalak, I'll start the presentation and introduce Mrs. Caruso.
All right, Dr. Manfrey.
Thank you. Very excited to be here this evening. Thank you, members of the Upper Darby Board of Directors and Upper Darby community for allowing us to present this important information. After all, our English learner population is a little over 10% of our overall population, and we want to make sure that we are providing them with the best possible materials and instructional materials that we can possibly find. What Mrs. Caruso is going to present to you today is a proposed new program at the middle school level and the secondary level, which will help us to meet the language domains in English learning of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Our English learners are assessed in that area using the access test. In fact, our kids are taking the access test right now. And the proficiency levels through WIDA that will enable us, this program enables us to put our students in the proper program. It is cohesive enough and fluid enough that we address all students at their proficiency levels, whether it's entering, beginning, developing, expanding, bridging, or reaching, which are the WIDA proficiency levels for English language development. I want to thank Mrs. Caruso and her team of every secondary teacher at all the English learner teachers participated in this. And with that, I'll leave it to Mrs. Caruso to take you through the proposed programs. Thank you. Eileen?
Thank you, Dr. Manfrey. Good evening, members of the school board, district administrators, and members of the Upper Darby School District Committee. Community. My name is Eileen Caruso, and I'm the coordinator for the English Language Development Department. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present information for the proposed English Language Development Program for the middle school and the high school. Dr. Manfrey, do you mind moving to the next slide, please? Thank you. The programs are Inside and Edge by National Geographic, Hampton Brown, and Cengage. Inside is the middle school program for grades 6 to 8, and Edge is the high school program for grades 9 through 12. The programs are nearly identical with the same structure, organization, and features. They only differ based on content, and the following program highlights are for both of the programs. The continuity of the programs is definitely going to be a benefit for our students. Next slide, please. We began our research by talking to colleagues throughout the area, and we met with several publishers. We kept coming back to National Geographic because we found that it was the most comprehensive program and best suited the needs of our students. The National Geographic program is aligned to both the WIDA English Language Development Standards as well as the English Language Arts Common Core Standards. And we know that English learners are best served when they learn content and language together, and this program provides that opportunity. The programs are student-centered. They consider students assets and value the rich and diverse experiences that they bring with them. The materials include readings, pictures, art, and activities that reflect various cultures, backgrounds, and ethnic groups, and it gives the students multiple opportunities to connect with the content. Language development is an integral part of the curriculum of the program. Language routines are built in to every unit and include repeated opportunities for academic conversations. Academic conversations foster critical thinking and understanding. The programs also include a range of language functions used in the instructional language, and they're also taught directly in the academic vocabulary activities. The content is age appropriate. The age appropriate content is allotted into 4 different overlapping levels, and each level has complete standard coverage for literacy and language, and content is designed to interest students, making it easy for them to be engaged. And I apologize, that should say grades 6 through 12. Next slide, please. The following are the resources that are included in the cost. So for EDGE, which is the high school program, we will receive 340 textbooks, and we'll also receive 6 years of digital access. There's an additional resource, which is Comprehension Coach, and that includes reading comprehension and fluency. E-assessment is an online assessment platform, and there's 350 student subscriptions, and that includes assessments like placement assessments, progress monitoring, and achievement assessments. Also included is the teacher editions. Another additional resource that we will receive is a program titled Inside the USA, and that is a newcomer program, and that's a 10-week program. That's not a full year program. Next slide, please. And these are the resources that we will receive with inside the middle school program. The resources, again, are nearly identical, or they are identical. The only difference would be the numbers based on student counts. Also included in the cost is professional development, and that would be scheduled for sometime in August before the beginning of the school year. I believe that Dr. Manfrey has some textbooks, and I hope you have an opportunity to take a look at this wonderful program. And I thank you for your time. I'm happy to field any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Buford, are there any questions on this from board members?
No, there are no questions or comments.
Okay, just checking, make sure no one has any questions. We are looking at the text. They're very dynamic, so thank you.
Great. You're
You have
welcome.
a
Thank
question,
you.
President Brown?
No, just a quick comment. At a quick glance, the textbook looks phenomenal. It looks very good.
Could you just go over a little bit more the digital access so that the textbooks get outdated, but it's a 6-year digital access, correct?
That's correct. So any updates we would have the updates via the digital access, and that's going to be amazing for the teachers and the students because it will interact with Schoology really well. There's also a practice book that's included in there that will be easy to use with Schoology. So it's really going to be a great resource in this environment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any, I just want to check one more time. Are there any other questions from board members? No? Okay. Thank you so much. We can move on to the next agenda item, which is the Upper Darby High School scheduling project update.
Yes, I'd like to invite Mr. Tim Lambert, Mr. James Finch, and they'll take over from there.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Tim Lambert. I'm the manager of data and one of the project managers for the high school scheduling project. Presenting with me is Mr. James Finch. He's the other project manager who is also an assistant principal of the high school. He's in charge of operations, which includes scheduling. Tonight we'll be providing you an update on the high school scheduling project, which was first introduced to the board back in December. Can you flip to the next slide, please? Thank you. For this update, we'll begin by reviewing the project goals that were originally provided to the board, then provide an overview of the project, where we will identify the people involved and our processes. Following that, we'll delve into the progress to date, highlighting 2 major topics that we have been discussing. And lastly, we'll go over our timelines and next steps. Next slide, please. So to refresh you and the public, I'll read the following goals of the project as they were originally presented. Scheduling that meets graduation requirements, scheduling that meets students' needs, scheduling that provides equitable learning opportunities, scheduling that meets with staffing demands, scheduling that reduces the number of students on campus at one time, scheduling that prepares students to be college and/or career ready, a financially sustainable schedule, and a more efficient schedule to develop and implement. We will touch on many of these goals throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So changing the high school schedule is no simple undertaking, and will not only affect the existing high school students and staff, but potentially many graduating classes to come. To that end, it was very important that we created teams that represented the different stakeholders, as well as our professional staff at the high school, to ensure we had many viewpoints and individuals with academic backgrounds. As you can see on this slide, the high school team is made up of around 40 high school staff members from every level and discipline within the school. Ms. Simone, along with all the assistant principals, counselors, some teachers, supervisors, have been meeting every Tuesday since December to discuss the different topics associated with scheduling. Next slide, please. So our second team is the student advisory team, and that is composed of students in grades 10th through 12th grade, and they have been very instrumental in providing us great feedback on the topics we introduced to them and have provided some interesting and valuable ideas that we have been integrating into our discussions. We have had 2 meetings with them so far, and we'll be scheduling a 3rd soon. Several of the students have also joined our core team and have played a large role in discussions there as well. Next slide. So this leads us to our 3rd committee, the core team. This committee also has a fair number of participants. It is slightly different than the other teams in that it has representatives not only from the high school team and student advisory team, but also central administration staff, the 2 middle school principals, school board directors, and parents of students that attend both the high school and or the middle school. This committee has also met twice so far and has been very influential on how we have directed the project. I know this is an update, not a final presentation, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone that has taken the time to participate in this project so far. A large number of stakeholders have been participating and have been instrumental in providing the needed viewpoints and create an environment where we have been able to gather ideas and have great discussions. Next slide, please. So now that we introduced the committees, I'd like to go over how these teams work together. Using the goals from our initial direction, we identified relevant topics and introduced them to teams for discussion. The high school team acts as the first filter where we introduce a topic and get their professional thoughts and ideas on what would be most beneficial for both the students and staff. These discussions help us define some of the more important and viable ideas, which are then presented to the student advisory and core teams. As we receive feedback from the meetings, it is compiled and checked for suitability and viability. For example, if the idea suitable for our current or proposed environment, and do the numbers work when taking into account our start and stop time, staff, space availability, transportation, lunches, special needs, and many other variables needed to ensure a successful schedule. It is important to note that we are still at the stage where we are gathering feedback and calculating the viability of options. No decisions have been made at this time. We expect to have a completed list of scenarios completed soon, at which point we'll reconvene the student advisory and core teams for review. The most viable, recognized, and approved options will be compiled into official scenarios and presented to the teams for review. Ultimately, a final scheduling recommendation with potential alternatives will be approved by the teams. Next slide. So that actually, while it seems like a lot, is actually one of the first steps in the approval process. So it comes from the teams and it'll go through the next couple steps, which includes the recommendations will be presented to the steering committee, which is composed of Dr. McGarry and Dr. Manfrey. They will go through the recommendations, the associated reasoning behind those recommendations, and all the scheduling calculations. They will provide their own feedback, of which may require revisiting with the core and student and high school teams, and eventually make the decision to move forward with the recommendation or not. From there, the final recommendation will be presented to the Education and Pupil Services Committee and potentially be moved on to the board. I will provide you a timeline of these steps later in the presentation. I will now pass the presentation to Mr. Finch to provide our progress to date.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert, and good evening, Upper Darby School Board, Board President Brown, Co-Chair Mitchell, and members of our Upper Darby School community. Thank you for allowing Mr. Lambert and I the opportunity to provide this important informational update to our scheduling committee work. Before we get into talking about the different topics that have been discussed by the multiple committees that Mr. Lambert just very eloquently laid out and described for us, I'll start by defining some common terms that we have been using in these meetings. So let's start by looking at a block schedule, which is actually the current scheduling method at Upper Darby High School. Our school runs on a 5-block schedule, with each block being 79 minutes. Students typically take 4 blocks of content area courses a day, with the 5th block being a lunch and then a learning community, intervention, or an additional section of AP classes. A small number of students do opt to have a 5th class instead of the lunch and learning community block, but by and large, the majority of our students are rostered in 4 content area courses a day in a block schedule. So courses typically run for a semester in a block schedule, with only a few exceptions for intervention classes and AP courses, and there are 2 semesters a year. So building on that, since a content area course equals 1 credit, and there are 4 courses a semester, times 2 semesters a year, it gives you about 8 credits a year, which over the span of a 4-year high school career with some additional AP and or intervention credits thrown in there, because these students can take anywhere from 32 to 36 high school credits over their career at Upper Darby High School, which is actually far above the state graduation requirement of 21 credits. Now, to contrast that with a period-based scheduling model, in a period schedule, courses run for the entire school year. Additionally, depending on the model chosen, there are usually 7 or 8 periods a day, which run anywhere from 40 to 45 minutes with a lunch period. On the topic of credit accrual, depending on the model chosen, students typically will accrue 6 to 8 credits a year, which can mean 24 to 32 high school credits over the course of their career, which is a little more in line with state graduation requirements of 21 credits. An analysis of local districts in the Delaware County area shows that roughly 2/3 of the districts run a period-based schedule, and the other 1/3 run on a block schedule. Next slide, please. A major point of discussion in all of the teams was the topic of block scheduling format compared to a period scheduling format. We found that our current block schedule was highly valued by both the Student Advisory Committee and the core team, whereas the High School Scheduling Committee identified many pros and cons of both scheduling models. Students reported that with the current block schedule, they liked how they could take more courses each year while focusing on less courses at a time, since they only had 4 courses a day typically. And parents on the core team reported that they liked the fact that a block schedule more closely resembled a college schedule with semester-based classes. Teachers often cited how a student's attention span can start to wander in the longer block schedule and maybe more conducive to the shorter 45-minute time span of a period schedule. Next slide, please. Another topic discussed was the topic of reducing the number of students on campus at one time. There are several motivating factors for this goal. One of the factors is our growing enrollment at Upper Darby High School. As we already know, Upper Darby High School currently has an incredibly large student body of a little over 3,800 students. And it's actually projected to see an enrollment growth to the point where Upper Darby High School is projected to have over 4,000 students the next 2 to 3 years. And when you combine that with the facts that our building space is finite, the number of classrooms that are utilized for academic instruction currently is close to the maximum, you can see there really is a need to start getting creative with space. Additionally, a large number of students on campus has other consequences. It increases the number of students in halls during transition time between classes, requires the high school to run more scheduled lunches, and can have a direct effect on the number of discipline incidents that occur throughout the school year. Next slide, please. Our discussions on this topic included 2 major ways in which this goal can be achieved. The first one is expanding access to online education for those students that it works for. We found through these different committee discussions that there are actually students who really enjoy and are seeing great success in this model of education. It's providing them with the flexibility to explore their academic interests on their own time, and additionally have the availability to pursue interests outside of the classroom as well. For these reasons, we discussed having full-time virtual learning in both a synchronous and an asynchronous model available for students that choose that option. We also discussed the importance of providing full-time in-person instruction for students with IEPs. The other way to reduce the number of students on campus at one time is to run a cohort model, where students cycle through a series of in-person and virtual learning days. There are a number of options that we are just beginning to filter through our high school committee right now. And some of the ideas are, of course, we are comparing to our current full, in-person model that we ran pre-COVID. We've been discussing the possibility of having a rotating virtual day where every day or every third day is virtual for students. We've been discussing the possibility of having a half day where it's a half day virtual and the other half is in-person instruction. We've been discussing a partial day where students would have 3 blocks in person and 1 block virtual. And then, of course, we're comparing them to our baseline, which is our full in-person pre-COVID model. And that wraps up the topics discussed for the committees up to this date. I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Tim Lambert for a review of the timeline and the next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Finch. So to take where we're at and where we need to be, there is a time limit on this, I would say, where the information in the proposed scenarios need to go through the approval stage if we are planning on implementing this for this upcoming school year. So in February, we're continuing to gain the feedback and running the calculations to ensure that our scenarios are viable. In March, we hope to have our final topics discussed by the committees, the scenarios presented to the committees for review and feedback, in which they'll vote on the final scenarios that they want to present up to the steering committee. Then the steering committee will take ownership of those recommendations and provide feedback, make any adjustments as necessary, and we will communicate back with the teams. Then eventually, if the schedule continues on as we hope, in April, we will be coming back and presenting the final recommendations to the board. I believe that is everything that we have presenting. If you want to go to the next slide, yes. Now we're open for any questions or comments.
Thank you so much for the update. Mrs. Buford, are there any questions from board members?
Dr. Haig has a question.
Go ahead, Dr. Haig. Dr. Haig?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. I started talking. I swear I hit the unmute button. Anyway, apologies. My question is for Mr. Finch. And so I'm, as of course you know, but just so that everyone knows, I'm one of the board members who is on the core team. And I thought I may have misunderstood the suggestion, but I thought that there had been some discussion of sort of blending the period and block, doing sort of like a hybrid thing where students have some periods and some blocks. Did I misunderstand that, or is that on the table?
No, you didn't misunderstand that. And also, I find myself having full discussions while I'm on mute constantly. Not a date goes by when that doesn't happen.
It's a curse this time. It is. Thank you.
Very, very much so. Yeah, so we have discussed the idea of a hybrid model, meaning hybrid between block and a period schedule. After discussing it on a couple different committees, we kind of came to the conclusion that that's basically what we have now is very, very close to a hybrid model. So our current schedule it's a 5-block schedule, but it's actually each of those blocks is made up of 2 periods called a skinny period that run for 37 minutes in length. And we do have, in our current model, we have some courses that do run for a period at a time that are full year as opposed to a semester block. So, one thing that we noticed after, discussing that hybrid model was it's really, really, really similar to what we have now, and almost didn't have as much legs to stand on its own as a whole separate model, because it's basically the current Upper Darby block schedule that runs skinnies.
That makes sense. I had sort of a suspicion of that before, but thank you for clarifying that.
Mr. Brown has a question. President Brown?
Yes, just a quick question. I know I'm told that there's parents on your committee, so I'm curious to know are any parents dynamically opposed to any of the options? Like I know we seem to hear from parents who have strong opinions about they either want their kids all back in school or they don't want them in school until COVID is a thing of the past. So I'm curious to know if you have any extreme opinions on your committee that you have to navigate through.
James, you want to take that or you want me to?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, so whenever you get a bunch of educated professionals together to talk about something as important as education and educational models, you do get a lot of different opinions coming to the table, which is exactly what we were looking for when we came out and started looking through this, the possibility of revisiting the high school schedule. With that being said, I don't feel like we have, come across any people that are steadfast in one way or the other, that have at least shared those viewpoints with us on the core team.
Thank you, Mr. Finch. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, invite Mr. Lambert to correct me if I'm wrong, or if there was something else that he, wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think ultimately there was more obviously a leaning towards in person, but when you look at the other situations such as the number of students or that some students learn better at home, the idea of including virtual learning was received as options. So it was no, we have to go back to the way things were. There's, no two ways about it. People did see the reasoning behind a lot of the different topics that we're bringing up and why.
Understood. Thank you, gentlemen.
I think Dr. McGarry has a comment.
If you don't mind, Ms. Mitchell, I have several items I'd just like to, ask, because I'm not in the meetings like Dr. Manfrey. I just have some questions here listening to this tonight just to think about. First question for James or for Mr. Lambert. By the way, thank you for the presentation. First, just a question within the committee. Is there any conversation regarding the percentage of students and the academic levels they're in currently at the high school as far as the schedule is concerned?
No, we have yet to bring that up to our scheduling committees, but no, we do know for our high school enrollment in our different levels, about 20% of our students at Upper Darby High School are enrolled in courses that are either accelerated, honors, or AP. And the other 80% are enrolled in either academic or unleveled courses. So we discussed a little bit about the possibility of unleveling our courses at the high school, but we didn't get a chance to move as far into that as we thought we would at this point.
Yeah, I think the unleveling is more of what causes fear and panic. I would ask as the superintendent, I know the board would too, probably in our work in the reports that we're talking about each month, is expectations. I think we need to have a look at the schedule regardless of the periods and really give kids opportunities academically beyond just an academic level. So it would be good to have that conversation in the scheduling committee with folks just to hear their feedback about our expectations of students and promoting our students' ability levels. And then another question that comes up when it relates to scheduling, Mr. Finch or to Mr. Lambert, just off the top of my mind, because I know I get phone calls each year, I'm sure board members do as well. What failure in the block? How does failure in the block? Do we see a number of students struggling prior to the pandemic? I understand the pandemic is one thing, but what about student failure rate at the high school prior to the pandemic and scheduling from semester to semester and sequencing of courses? What does that look like, or how does that impact the schedule, and how is that being discussed on the scheduling committee?
Yes, so failure at the high school so when we talk about failures, we can talk about what's known as a course fail rate, which is the percentage of all courses that have received a failing grade. Okay, so the course failing rate for Upper Darby High School, looking back over the past 5 years, has stuck around 10% pre-pandemic. Okay. So, and what that does is, because we do run on that block schedule where we have semester-long courses, for students that fail that first semester, that can cause them to need their second semester schedule rescheduled. So, and that's one thing that we talked about, when in all of these committees, was how difficult and how much manpower it actually takes to schedule school of the size of Upper Darby High School really effectively 3 times. Once during course selection in the spring, which we're in the middle of right now. Once in the summer after the second semester failures come out. And then once again in the spring after the first semester failures come out, And when you look at that course fail rate, and I'm talking about course fail rate because those are the courses that need to be rescheduled, and we're looking at course fail rates around 10, 12%, that means 10 to 12% of our courses, need to get rescheduled then. And the real tough time when that happens is the time that we just passed. When we deal with that turnover from first semester to second semester, because that turnaround time is really tight, and it takes a great deal of manpower for our assistant principals, our guidance department, our social workers. It's really all hands on deck during that time. So we have discussed that in our committees. We have discussed that failure rate and how that does affect the high school schedule. And then additionally, you have those instances where you go to schedule for a second semester and a course was failed in the first semester, but it won't fit into the second semester. So what happens is you end up having these kids having to drop courses, unfortunately, in the second semester. And what happens then is you'll have teachers, who don't have what's considered a full class of 25 students or more enrolled during that second semester. So yeah, we have talked about failures and its impact on the schedule.
So just, two more points to that. And I really think it's important, this is a great presentation, that we, more so talk about how we're not looking to make drastic changes with the schedule, but really try to help those kids out so they don't miss out on learning opportunities or elective offerings that we have. And then we struggle sometimes when we hear from parents, why can't we run an elective? I think we really need to articulate for you and James, if you can, you're going to hear this feedback when you give it to us anyway, that the parents are aware of. We want to provide these opportunities for all students, and we have to make sure we're on the front end with our instructional practices, and that students are successful in our classes so that they can move to the next class, and that we have an expectation that they can do well. With that said, prior to the pandemic, previous to moving into the interim and superintendent's role, I know I was a part of the idea of, and we used a term today, and I want to make sure we clarify it, and Dr. Haggett asked this previously. When we talk about hybrid, in this moment, I'm talking about the opportunity for kids to either be in person or have some classes virtually or flex in and out of the schedule. And what I mean is hybrid. Prior to the pandemic, it's true, correct, that we allowed students to have some classes that they could take through an online program, and then they could attend for in-person school. Is that the case, Mr. Finch?
Yes, that is the case. Prior to the pandemic, we had our Upper Darby Cyber Academy where students could do asynchronous online work, and then also take some in-person classes at the high school, yes. Additionally, I will add that we have had some feedback from students and from parents claiming that they love asynchronous learning and that flexibility that it allows students to, really own their own learning schedule, and provides them an opportunity to do stuff outside of school that they normally wouldn't be able to, like, have a job or, experience some, outside of school plays or whatnot. But they love that flexibility of that asynchronous and that online learning.
Yeah, my final, I appreciate that. That's an important point, I think. There's a lot of conversation, out there that, we're looking at changes just because of COVID. And if you can, please, emphasize this is not just because of COVID. Prior to the pandemic, we had some concerns that we wanted to look at the schedule. It just so happens that we've learned a lot during the pandemic, that there are students who are on medical homebound, who have appreciated, who've reached out to me, I think they've reached out to board members, that their students can now log in live for a synchronous session. As you just said, Mr. Finch, there are students who are thriving asynchronously. Just this Saturday in Upper Darby Rising, there were students involved, hoping that we would still provide a combination of an opportunity. Can I attend some classes virtually? And then can I come into school for some classes, whether it be for work or those opportunities? So if we can just make sure that when you go back to these meetings, prior to coming back to us and the public, just that we talk to people about this is not trying to take away from any student, and that we're really trying to meet the needs of all the students. And I think it sounds like in this presentation, there are opportunities where it can be beneficial to everybody and that nobody really has to lose out. Is that fair so far from what I'm hearing in this presentation?
Yeah, Dr. McGarry, I would say that's definitely fair. I know the cracks of, and the issues that we've seen with our current schedule, you have been kind of evident before COVID. There was some talk amongst teachers that I had discussions with about, how maybe that block scheduling time, maybe that time that's in a block schedule of 79-minute classes is too long for some of our students for their attention spans. Also with our skinny periods, because like I was talking with Dr. Haig, each one of our blocks is broken into 2 skinny periods. And there are some academic classes that run in those periods, which really kind of limits that availability of, those academic classes. Additionally, our AP classes, they run in a block one semester and a skinny period another semester, which really kind of limits some of the AP availability. So there were issues that we knew about pre-COVID. I think one thing that COVID did was it put a huge stress test on our entire system, and not just our school system, every school system across the country. And, it gave us a chance to really stop and look around and see, what, maybe there were some things that we were just taking, as normal before the pandemic hit, and that shouldn't have been normal, So COVID gave us the chance to stop and say, what, let's take a look at this, and that's the opportunity that we are taking with this scheduling committee. And it may come out that we make a scheduling recommendation for a change, and it may come out that we don't make a scheduling recommendation for a change. Either way, no matter what we do, it's going to be backed up with multiple points of input from the community and multiple points of research as well. So
my only final point is I think it's important to the students that are on there with so much going on and so much stress and so much pressure, that students that are a part of the committee, that we do continue to, whether it's through our student reps or the students that are there, provide some feedback to the students. Because oftentimes, because of social media, because of comments, kids start to fear and panic that I'm going to lose out on something, that the school district's going to make a change. We do not want to cause upset or fear to kids in any way, shape, or form. And the ultimate goal is, maintaining and providing the same level of opportunities for all students that currently exist and not taking away those opportunities. So, James, if you and Tim, when you meet with students, I know I'm going to be a part of some conversations with Dr. Manfrey and Mrs. Simone too. We don't want this to be a situation where it's causing fear and panic with kids. We're not trying to do that. So if we could talk to kids about that too, I think it would be important. I think it's great that they're a part of the committee as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. McGarry. With that being said, and I'm not, minimizing the concern about the students. I'll tell you, some of these students on these, well, not some, all of the students on these student committees are incredible. The thoughts that they come up with and the ideas that they're able to, articulate at such a young age and with such depth of understanding and knowledge it's really inspiring and makes me very happy as a school leader in this system, that we have students that are like that. So they are a great resource, and we will let them know that they should not be, fearful in this environment. That's a great point.
Thank you, Mr. Finch and Mr. Lambert, for this comprehensive presentation. I did have just one point of clarity on the slide that talks about the different options. You say full in-person for IEP students. Are you considering having a full in-person option for all students if that was a choice they wanted to make?
Yes, we are. Yes, and what we're the main thing that we wanted to express during this is everything that we're looking at this point. It's just that we're looking at it. We're in an exploratory discovery phase where we're getting input from multiple stakeholders and hearing all sides and weighing all types of different options. So if there is, that basically nothing is off the table right now, including, in-person instruction. Again, this is a committee that is looking at many, many different options.
Thank you. And have we done enough research on trying to help kids that are in that 10 to 12% fail rate? I know we talked about, the rescheduling and, sometimes the classes aren't full. Have we really taken a deep dive into what's happening with our 10 to 12% of the students that are failing?
James, this is Dr. Manfred. I'd like to try and answer that question. The high school administration, along with Mrs. Simone, the high school principal, has been providing ongoing professional development this year with our staff in just that area. We have even taken the opportunity to get the kids involved in making sure that the staff understands the impact that failing grades may have on their future. So I know that Mrs. Simone has taken an active leadership role with her staff in this regard, and making sure that we find strategies and ways to help our students be more successful, to help that 10%. Well, it's actually, that's 10% of the courses, not 10% of the students. But to help that percentage of students move forward with their academic career here at Upper Darby High School. And I know that they've provided the staff extensive research in that area. There's been research in this area as far as eliminating zeros, giving a grade that is for allowing students to make up incomplete work at any time. In other words, that there's no deadline, there's no date where students can't turn work in. So there's been a lot of different things that we're attempting to do to try and mitigate those failures.
Appreciate, obviously, we want our kids to start out their life with a high school diploma, so that's, and it affects, obviously, a lot of other things. So are there any questions from board members besides myself?
Dr. Haig has a question.
Dr. Haig, go ahead.
Yeah, I just realized maybe I am confused about something based on what Dr. Manfred just said, and maybe Mr. Lynch can clarify this, that what does it mean for a course to be a failure? I thought that 10% number was like a student, like an average across courses of, anyway, can you explain what the 10% number is?
Yeah, and I apologize for the confusion. I should have been more explicit about defining, that failure percentage. So typically, when you look at a fail rate, it's the percentage of courses that are failed. So, for example, if one student has taken 4 courses a semester and they fail one of those courses, that would be 1 out of 4, a 25% fail rate. So when I was discussing that 10% of courses were failed, and I meant of, total course final grades that were given, 10% of those final grades that were given were in the failing range. And the reason why I discussed that metric in this presentation is because I was approaching it from a scheduling point of view, where I have to have a system and I have to have counselors and a schedule built that reschedules course failures. Okay, if you want to talk about student failure rate, which would be, I would say, would be the percentage of students that have failed 1 or more courses. Our student failure rate at Upper Darby High School is around 17% for this school year right now. And I can look back in previous historical data. I have it, close to my fingertips right now. But that's the difference between those two. There's the course fail rate, which is percentage of final course grades that are failed, that are a failing grade, and the student fail rate, which is the percentage of students with 1 or more fails.
Thank you, Mr. Finch. And so that clarifies for me what Dr. Manfred was saying. He was sort of comparing it to identifying students who failed, as you say, 1 or more, which of course accounts for that discrepancy. Thank you. I understand now.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for board members on this update? No, not at this time. Okay. Let's move on to the agenda item number 4, the COVID compensatory services informational item.
Okay, thank you. So our fourth agenda item, as Ms. Mitchell, you mentioned, is the COVID Compensatory Services, or CCS is the acronym. So just by way of background, and really before I begin, we've been working through, developing this process, since as far back as the summer when the first guidance was released by the Department of Education in June, with multiple iterations of changes and new guidance that have been impacting our decision-making moving forward. But the special ed supervisors and Jennifer Jones, our coordinator of special education, have really taken the brunt of the legwork in developing this process and pulling this off. We've been meeting routinely since the summer to redefine and develop our approach to provide this to our students who need this recoupment services. So just as some background, and this is the definition from the Department of Education, and I won't read through the entire thing, but I'll just briefly give you an overview. Obviously, you heard a lot about the pandemic and the impacts on all of our students, in particular our students with IEPs, or our most vulnerable students in our special education in a world. And as a remedy, the Department of Education recommends that we provide some type of recoupment services to those students who are impacted the most. Now that said, I also have to give a lot of credit, to our special ed teachers and our therapists and everyone else who last school year during the school closures went, in my opinion, above and beyond to provide services and supports to our students way more than comparing other school districts that they provide to their students. Regardless, the level of instruction that was provided last school year, and no fault of anyone, but the pandemic, is not the same as it is right now, and is not the same as it is in person or in a virtual environment. We are instructed to provide a free and appropriate public education to the extent that we could during the school closures, which again is going to have an impact on our students who are most vulnerable. So again, the Department of Education provided this as a remedy for students who were not able to recoup lost progress during the pandemic. And I'll explain to you how we determined that and how we came up with that process. So when students returned to instruction in the fall, IEP teams and case managers collected data over the course of the next 3 to 4 months. And they compiled it and they averaged it and they submitted that data and they compared it to where progress monitoring or IEP goals and current progress was in March. And they compared from where they were in March to where they were in January. And if there was still any regression or skills were not recouped at that time, that student was deemed eligible for something called COVID Compensatory Services, or additional service provided to that student as a remedy to make up for the lost instruction. Now, many students did recoup that instruction with daily, frequent, and routine skill development by their case manager, the teachers, the therapists, whoever it might be providing that service. We still have a number of students who did qualify after January who require this additional service. The other piece of this too, which is part of what the Department of Education also recommended, was that we were not to provide this service and take away time in the least restrictive environment. So meaning that if a student was going to a general education science class or a math class, we were not allowed to pull that student out of that math class or that science class to provide this additional recoupment instruction. So meaning that kind of required us to provide this service, or to plan to provide this service after school hours. So our team developed a process for the data collection, for the approval process. Parents were issued the appropriate paperwork, notifying them that they were eligible for this CCS service. And then we planned for an after-school support program starting in March. And I'll go through this in the next couple of slides. So our goal is to start, in early March, and we selected this date over the next couple of months to provide, continuous extra support during the spring months. Then take some time off to pause at the beginning of June, and then give students opportunity to, relax and have a break from extra service, and then lead up to our extended school year, which starts in the end of June. So we believe that doing what's best for our kids is we provide them with the additional support throughout the spring and then going into the summer for the extended school year. The first week in March, we're targeting to address professional development with our staff and provide them with the resources that they'll need to plan and prepare for students come March 8th. And we're looking at a 4-day week proposal, Monday through Thursday. And again, not every student who qualified for every IEP goal, which I know might sound tricky. Some students qualified for math. Some may have qualified for reading. Some may have qualified for only speech and language or occupational therapy. But we provided, we're targeting 1 hour after school, per day, based upon what the skills that they need, that recruitment support moving forward. There's roughly about 600 students, just under 600 students who qualified. Another requirement was that IEPs had to be amended, and something called, we call a NREP, or a Notice of Recommended Educational Placement, were issued to our families, notifying them or the family that their student did qualify, for CCS. Families that did not qualify, or students who did recoup the instruction over the period of the data collection process, were also notified that they did not qualify for CCS. Our staff, we're looking to comprise, of course, of our special education teachers, our therapists, personal care assistants, and school nurses as well to provide that support. The estimated cost that you'll see up there is a high estimate. We believe it's going to come just under $300,000, but we estimate on the high end to be about $318,000. This will be for the cost of providing or paying our staff to provide the service after school. There's two parts of the funding that come with this program. The first part is something called the Special Education COVID-19 Impact Mitigation Grant. This was a grant that was awarded to us in the fall, and we had to retroactively go back in and apply for it, but it was provided to every school district in the Commonwealth based upon their student enrollment in special education programs, a dollar amount. And you can see it's about $155,000 that we were awarded to offset the costs of providing CCS. And then again, the remainder of the funds, the remainder of the cost will be offset by our elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, or part of the CARES Act funding. And that's all for this presentation. Again, it's an informational item, and we're looking to start, we have scheduled the fine-tuning details right now. We're getting ready to get moving in the next week or two. I'll take any questions from the board at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak. I do have one question. I thought students in the elementary level didn't go to school on Wednesdays, so how would this work?
So it's a good question. So we have, and as you know, many of our students are still learning virtually. So we have a schedule worked out where some of our students will be attending virtually and also attending in person. During that Wednesday time will be a virtual CCS session for our students as well, who will be at home until we make shifts in our schedule. If we go down that path, we're going to adjust our approach to CCS as well. But at this time right now, students who are working virtually on Wednesday will get the virtual CCS at home as an extension of the school day.
And what about middle school students who, when we bring some back in, would only be attending school 1 day a week? Does that mean 3 days would be additional virtual instruction?
Right, so the day that they would be in school, if they choose to come into school, they will be scheduled into an in-person group, whichever day that might be, and the remaining 3 days will be virtual after school, as if they were, remaining virtually, getting instructed.
Thank you. Are there any questions from board members? Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. My question is regarding transportation. If we're saying a student is requiring these services, will transportation be provided for that extended time at school if they're in person?
Yes, we are planning to provide transportation, and we have the schedules worked out with Mr. Tarver and Mr. Lee. We have it all scheduled and prepared for students to get, home at the end of the school day.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions from board members? Mrs. Buford?
I don't see any more questions.
Okay, thank you. We can move on to the next agenda item, which is policies.
And then I'll ask Mr. Desnoyers to brief us on the policies up for second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak and Ms. Mitchell. Just to confirm, the policies on the agenda tonight will if moved forward by the board, appear for a second reading at the March board meeting, at which time, if approved, they will go into effect. So there are 3 policies with changes for this meeting. They are Policy 103, Discrimination, Title IX, Sexual Harassment Affecting Students, Policy 200, Enrollment of Students, and Policy 218.3, Discipline of Student Convicted or Adjudicated of Sexual Assault. The following are summaries of the changes to each policy. For Policy 103, the policy was updated to include the requirement for the school entity to take action upon notification of a student being convicted or adjudicated of sexual assault against another student in the same school. However, according to Title IX, the school entity cannot discipline a student prior to a written determination, but the school can change the placement of a student, for example, placing the student in an online learning program or transfer to another school, which would comply with both Federal Title IX and PA School Code 24 PS Section 13-1318.1 requirements. A new section was added to this policy titled Discipline Placement of Student Convicted or Adjudicated of Sexual Assault. Policy 200, there are updates to remove duplicate language, and there is also a minor update to the AR 200, AR 7 to comply with changes to state law. That's PA Act 110. And finally, Policy 218.3. This is a new policy drafted to comply with the provisions of Act 110 of 2020. Mr. Marszalek and Ms. Mitchell, that's the end of my comments about the policies.
Thank you, Mr. Desnoyers. Ms. Buford, are there any questions from board members in regards to the policy changes?
Ms. Mitchell, there are no comments or questions from the board members.
Okay. We're now at the time for public comments. Ms. Buford, will you read the public comments that came in regards to the agenda items?
Our first comment is from Ms. Melissa Oxenberg, located at 1036 Bryan Street in Drexel Hill. The comment was received on 2/22 via email. Well, I apologize. This comment does not meet the qualifications for a public comment to be read. The following comment is from Allison McConnell at 848 Turner Avenue in Drexel Hill. Comment was received on the 23rd via email regarding agenda item number 3. Comment reads, "Thank you, school board directors, for your careful consideration to the following. Number 1, a hybrid learning schedule for next year brings about many concerns. Please understand and research open campuses in urban areas. In essence, that is what the school district is suggesting. With a scenario of 3 blocks on campus and 1 block online, you are increasing the foot traffic through the doors at various times of the day. This brings about additional security concerns. Having some students on campus while others are not may also increase truancy, as you see in open campuses. Number 2, one of the project goals is to decrease scheduling demands on staff. Please help me understand how scheduling 3,800 to 4,000 students into various hybrid schedules is less difficult or less time-consuming than the current block schedule. I am far more concerned with what is best for our students than the scheduling demands for staff. Number 3, please elaborate on how this proposal increases equity for all student groups. I am not understanding how a hybrid schedule is best for any subgroup, but rather I see the potential concerns among many subgroups, in fact, making it less equitable. Consideration to parent support of the hybrid model, ensuring students are logging in and participating, is not an accurate science. While I believe UD teachers are doing a phenomenal job teaching virtually throughout the pandemic, student engagement is just never going to be as high in a virtual setting as it is in person. Given the data on cyber charters, why would virtual learning be a permanent solution? Number 4, how will staffing needs decrease as a result of implementing periods versus blocks without eliminating some of the course options currently available? Number 5, heavy consideration on how switching from block scheduling to periods is more conducive to preparing students for college career is needed. Most students report that they are more adequately prepared to handle post-secondary coursework when exposed to block scheduling in high school, as they mirror one another. Reduced attention happens after 20 to 25 minutes for all teens, whether block or period, and direct instruction should not be happening whether it is for full periods or full blocks. Block periods allow students time to collaborate and work independently in addition to direct instruction. Number 6, having the technology now, one-to-one document cameras, etc., does not necessitate permanent changes to the schedule. Please prioritize what is developmentally appropriate over the technological capability. All, in caps, of our students need face-to-face interaction on a full-time basis.
Thank you, Mrs. Buford, and thank you, Mrs. McConnell, for your comments and questions. I am going to turn this over to Dr. McGarry to see if he would like to make some comments. You have a lot of questions here, and we'll do our best to try to get some of them answered tonight.
Yes, I try to provide a response. Also, I'm not in the scheduling meeting, so James and Tim, if they're still on, can certainly provide some added feedback. But essentially, my response at this time is that many of the questions are going to be addressed tonight. Hopefully, they were, and moving forward in follow-up presentations to the timeline. At this time, I don't have any indication from Mr. Finch or from Mr. Lambert that we are actually moving away from block scheduling. What I understand in hearing tonight and in conversations is that we're looking at ways to more efficiently schedule a high school on the block, to provide learning opportunities for students who want to learn synchronously, asynchronously, or come in and out of the school that way, something that we already provide. And really, for my office, as I said earlier, I'm really interested in making sure that we're pushing our students, that we should be doing better for our students. Our students can do well. We should believe they should do well, and we should provide them with more opportunities. And I'm worried that when students are unsuccessful in some classes, they're being limited to other elective opportunities that they may enjoy more, or that may inspire them on their career path toward leaving our high school and engaging in something other than maybe an English class that I used to teach that they may not want to find so interesting. So, our goal, as I've said, is to provide synchronous and asynchronous instruction and in-person instruction to those students who want it, and not deny students who want in-person education to have in-person full-time education. What this pandemic has taught us is that it forced us to become more advanced in our technology, and we are now there. Thank you to the board, thank you to the CARES dollars. We have technology in our classrooms that now, instead of a student getting only asynchronous learning when they're on medical homebound, they can log in for a class and receive a better instructional opportunity. This is not about taking away. I get that clearly has been what's been somehow, some way provided to the public. The other very important part for the board and for me, the superintendent, is that attendance rates are important. They're a part of how schools are held accountable. So truancy and attendance rates are looking at about 72% prior to the pandemic. And that's going on for a couple of years prior to that. Also graduation rates. Graduation rates prior to the pandemic were at about 82, 83%, I believe, James and Tim. So we're looking at trying to look at the schedule during this pandemic, and coming out of this pandemic, kids are suffering, kids are struggling. How can we make sure that we provide them with opportunities to re-engage, do well, and not hold kids back? This is not a review of a schedule to force anybody into one learning opportunity versus another. It's really trying to help out coming out of this pandemic and fix some of the issues we were seeing prior to the pandemic. But I do appreciate Mrs. McConnell's question, and we are definitely going to take that all into consideration. We do provide students right now who have anxiety issues or some other concerns opportunities to come in for a class in person, and they could take some classes virtually or asynchronously now. So as far as the open campus concept, There are numerous students who take us up on that schedule prior to the pandemic. And more students, I think, are looking to continue with that opportunity coming in and out of our schools. And I think we have Mrs. Candace Riccioni, who's doing her dissertation on virtual learning and online learning, and she's the principal running our Cyber Academy. Just met with her recently, and she'll be coming before the board and talking about her work and what's also there. Most universities and colleges, and coming out of this, there's a move toward learning in an online learning synchronous environment, and there's an expectation that kids are able to do that. So we're trying to balance all of this. This is not a one-size-fits-all, meaning we're trying to take away from some kids to give to others. We think we can build a schedule that meets the needs of all three of those opportunities. James, Tim, anything you guys want to add, or Dr. Manfrey?
Yeah, Dr. McGarry, I think there's two things that I'd add, and I'm not going to go into as much depth as you just went, but when I hear a comment like that, two things pop to mind. One is it sounds like the perception is there that we have some type of backroom, decision-making process, that we aren't discussing this with multiple committees and multiple stakeholders, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. We have parents and community members on our core team. We have, high school teachers who are also, parents and community members on our high school team. And we have, included students in the discussion the entire way. So everything that we are, discussing and talking about is at this point is merely that. It's discussions, and we're talking about and filtering through these many different ideas. So there's not some, grand master plan to, shoehorn anybody into any type of decision, like what it kind of sounds like from that comment. The other thing I'd like to point out is I think that comment shows that that person really cares about our school community and really cares about our students, and we do as well. And that's one reason we are looking at the high school schedule, is because we want to make sure we have the best offerings for all of our students, not just a certain subset or of the population. We want it for everyone. So I think when I hear a comment like that, I think it comes from a lot of the same places of the emotional caring and respect for our students and our school community that is exactly where the idea to start looking at the high school schedule comes from as well. Thank you.
Mr. Fentz, thank you. This is Dr. Manfrey. I just want to comment on some of what Dr. McGarry alluded to that I think is very important. I want to highlight the fact that one thing Dr. McGarry said this evening that I think is extremely important is that while the pandemic provided us an opportunity to learn what we are really capable of in terms of technology in the classroom, these conversations have been taking place for a long time in Upper Darby School District as far as the Upper Darby High School schedule, for a number of reasons that have been highlighted tonight. One of the reasons that Dr. McGarry indicated earlier today is average daily attendance rate, or our graduation rate. The average daily attendance rate has been declining. Our graduation rate has been declining. So there are things that we need to change. There are things that we need to improve upon. I do want to make sure that everyone understands how the average daily attendance rate is calculated, because it sounds as if maybe 72% of our students are only showing up on a daily basis, when the reality is that it's calculated by the number of students who are enrolled for 90 or more days and who attend regularly, meaning 90% of the time. So it's calculated a little bit differently. But the fact is that we have been examining some of this data for a long time and talking about how we can improve our performances in all of those areas: academically, attendance, graduation, discipline. So this is not just a result of a pandemic. The pandemic has certainly taught us some things that we didn't know previously, and we're trying to capitalize on those things that we've learned in order to help all students have opportunities to succeed here at Upper Darby High School.
Thank you for your responses, and I'm sure that the committee, Mr. Finch and Mr. Lambert, will be looking at these questions to see, which ones have been discussed and what still needs to be discussed. Thank you, Mrs. McConnell. I did want to just add, just before the pandemic, I serve on the IU school board, and they brought in this this robot that had an iPad on it, and a child was on the other end of the screen that was on they were simulating medical homebound, what it could look like. And to be honest with you, I was like, oh, we'll never be able to have anything like that in Upper Darby. And I, sort of my heart sank a little bit. And now we do, basically, because we have the camera and the technology in the hands of every child. Last time we talked about this, I talked about equity, and we are looking at this through an equity lens. So I just appreciate everything that you all are doing, as well as all of our volunteers who are graciously examining this, and it's a bear. So we appreciate you trying to see what we can do to make things better for every child in the Upper Darby School District. So you can read the next question or comment, Mrs. Buford.
I also wanted to add that Dr. McGarry and Mr. Finch responded directly to Ms. McConnell earlier via email as well. Our second and final comment, is from Ms. Lori Patterson at 717 Concord Avenue in Drexel Hill. The comment was received on the 23rd at 6:37 p.m. via email regarding agenda item number 3. The comment reads, Dear school board directors and district administrators, thank you as always for your hard work and ongoing sacrifices in this difficult time. I am writing about tonight's Education and Pupil Services Committee agenda number 3, item number 3, in regards to proposed changes to the high school schedule. While I only have a 9th grader at the high school, I do feel some anxiety about the fact that significant changes are being proposed at this point in time. These changes appear to include a dramatic adjustment to the way the day is structured and the introduction of a permanent hybrid school day. We are still experiencing a dramatic and unprecedented year of educational instruction due to the pandemic related to COVID-19. I do not think I am alone in saying that I will consider it a success to have my children's emotional well-being intact when they enter the 2021-2022 school year. I will be especially grateful if the district has plans in place to ease the adjustment of all students as they reacclimate to in-person learning. Just 2 years ago, the high school created a new plan for quote-unquote pathways for graduation and made changes to the number of credits required for graduation. I believe last year was the first year that this plan was in place, a year interrupted by the current pandemic crisis. We can't properly evaluate the impact of the changes that were made by that plan, so I do wonder about adding more changes at this time. I would very much like to encourage the district administration and the school board to take into consideration the pace of changes that have occurred since last March, many of which could never have been anticipated. I am concerned about the potential impact on a student body and a school community of adding more uncertainty when as a collective we are all still reeling from a crisis that is anything but normal or certain. Thank you for your consideration. End of comment.
Thank you. I'm not sure there was an actual question there, Ms. Patterson. Thank you for your is there one?
Some clarity, I think it's.
Would you like to clarify? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. First, I appreciate hearing from Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. McConnell, as Mr. Finch said, definitely parents whose kids are great kids in the school district and are always involved. I would like to clarify a little bit in Mrs. Patterson's comment about pathways to graduation. We have implemented a program to identify students similar to what Mr. Marshallak talked about earlier about college and career pathways. Here in Upper Darby, we took that a little bit in more detail, and we're trying to identify students in our Naviance system to try to help them pick the course selection as they get through it. Current juniors right now are actually the class who we would see being able to graduate at 21 credits. Last year, the board authorized my office and Dr. Manfrey and Mrs. Simone to allow last year's seniors to graduate not having met the local graduation requirements of 26 credits, and instead to meet the state requirements of 21, and that was allowable under the state law. So really, this current junior year, the current juniors have that opportunity, and at this point in time, we don't really anticipate yet a high number of students taking us up on the opportunity to graduate at 21 credits right now. I do want to add, too, to the comment earlier and to this comment, no question we're worried about anxiety, and I think hopefully after tonight you'll hear from us. We're trying to plan now, I think we do this well. Sometimes it might not come across that way. Our planning is to try to anticipate how to help kids coming out of this pandemic and be ready for them when they return to provide those opportunities so it's not such a shock and they're not so worried about being behind. We've got to help kids get to where they want to still. It's nobody's fault this pandemic happened, and that's what we're really trying to do at looking at this schedule. And I will say to Mrs. Patterson, without question, we are looking at a plan to really ease and make the adjustments for students as we reacclimate to in-person learning coming out of this. So I appreciate the comment, and I agree. There's a lot that's going on. The Pathways to Graduation actually is one of the key indicators focusing us on the review of the schedule so that we do meet those students' needs when the board adopted that plan previously.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, for your comments and your concerns. Are there any other public comments, Mrs. Buford?
There are no more public comments at this time.
Okay, at this time, we'll review the agenda items. There are, excuse me, let me get it back on my screen. Apologize for that. There are three agenda items that need the board to move them forward to the next board meeting. The first one is agenda item number 1, adoption of instructional online resources. That's Alberto, IO, and Naviance. Is the board comfortable moving that forward?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Is there anyone that has any concerns about moving that forward? Okay, so that can, agenda item number 1 can move forward to the next board meeting. Agenda item number 2, adoption of textbook, secondary English learners. That was the EDGE and Cengage textbooks. Ed and I were able to look at them here in the boardroom. Are there any concerns from board members? I know they have filled out the appropriate ARs. Okay, is everyone comfortable moving it forward?
Yes.
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 Great. Agenda item number 3, the Upper Darby High School scheduling project was strictly informational. I'm sure you'll be seeing additional updates on that and a recommendation in April coming out of that project. Agenda item number 4, COVID compensatory services, was also informational. And the next up is agenda item number 5, 3 policies, 103, 200, and 218.3. We reviewed them earlier. Is everyone comfortable moving those forward?
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Okay. Anyone have any concerns? Okay. So that concludes our agenda for tonight. President Brown, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Education and People Services Committee meeting.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. We're going to take a few minutes just to have people switch seats so we can do the Finance and Operations Committee meeting. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your patience. The meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. I will now turn over the Finance and Operations Committee meeting to Co-Chair Mr. Fields.
Thank you, Board President Brown. Exciting stuff today. Mr. Rogers, please begin with an overview of your agenda items for this evening.
Sure. Tonight we have 3 agenda items, 2 board action and 1 informational. The first up is the initiation of trash removal services, which will be board action. District administration is going to discuss the options that we've considered moving forward for our trash removal services, and a recommendation will be given at the end of the presentation for the board to consider. Number 2 is a facilities update, which will be informational. Again, the district administration is going to give an update on the following projects: the Aronimink renovation and addition, Clifton Heights Middle School, the 8201 Lansdowne Ave renovation, and a continued need for a new elementary school, which is specifically to discuss the Cardington Field as a potential option. Number 3 is a policy update, which is board action. There are 3 policies tonight: 610 purchases subject to bid and quotation, 611 purchases budgeted, and 626 federal fiscal compliance. And if it's okay.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, I was going to just ask you to start with the first agenda item.
Sure. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Lee to discuss the first agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Good evening, everybody. My name is Marvin Lee. I'm the Controller of Operations. The Upper Darby School District is in a situation that we have to handle our own trash pickup in the near future, and I will be presenting 2 options to handle trash pickups and make a recommendation on next moves. The current service level. The Upper Darby School District owns 25 regular trash cans and 16 recycling trash cans in our schools. And the trash is picked up once a day during the school year and twice a week in the summer break. And recycling items are picked up once a week throughout the year. And any information about the estimated dollar figures, will be based on the current service level. Upper Darby School District has 2 options to consider to pick up our trash in the future. Number 1, in-house operations and contracted services operations. I'll talk extensively about the in-house operations today. So for you to run your own in-house operations for trash pickup, you need 3 major components. Number 1, equipment. You need people. You also need landfill contracts. Equipment, I'm going to talk about the equipment first. So you have 2 body models you have. You have a rear loader model and front loader models. You can actually get those items from the COSA contracts, and both models take 7 to 10 months to build. And also the front model is slightly more expensive, but Upper Darby School, the business office is recommending the front loader because it only requires 1 person to operate the machine instead of 2 people with a rear model. Equipment, we have 41 equipment throughout the school district. We're gonna need to replace all 41 items. The life expectancy of those dumpsters are about 10 years. All our dumpsters are currently a lot older than 10 years. And that's having the leakage issues and the maintenance and repair issues right now. And also our current dumpsters are not equipped, not compatible to be handled by the modern trash pickup equipment. Personnel. Personnel is the major reason, the primary reason that we were brave enough to think about the in-house operations. Upper Darby School District has more than 100 CDL drivers in transportation department, and that's like a major thing that we have to have. And we felt that we can train 5 to 7 operators to handle those trash trucks, and also more than a dozen drivers currently have experience in picking up trash. So our bus drivers run in the morning, usually between 7 and 9, and also in the PM between 3 and 4, 3 and 5. And a lot of our drivers have no duties in the middle of the day. That's 6 hours. Based on the routing and timing that we have done, it will take about 4 to 5 hours, 4 to 4.5 hours to complete the daily run, pick up all the trash, dump in the dumping ground, and come back. So we feel that we have more than enough time to handle the daily operations. The landfill contract. So when you have the equipment, when you have a people pick up those trash, you're gonna need to take those trash to either landfill station or recycling site. So we have a Marple transfer station. We will be taking those trash to Marple transfer station. And any recycling items, we're gonna be taking those to Grace Ferry transfer station in South Philadelphia. Interestingly, the recycling is 55% more expensive than handling the trash. For trash, it takes $58 per ton, and for recycling, it costs $90 to take the recycling out of our schools. So we thought about why do we have to do it? Obviously, the most important thing is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do for the environment, but the Act 101, Pennsylvania Act 101 of 1988 mandates if you are an institution in a township with more than 5,000 residents, you have to recycle. So we also confirmed with the EPA that we must recycle as a Upper Darby School District. The contracted services option is much simpler. We don't have to have our people. We don't have to have any contract. You just need one contract. And overwhelming number of school districts are using contracted services to handle the trash pickup. And we have many qualified national, regional, and local companies that can help us with their operations. We have two-step process, very simple two-step process. We need to either issue RFP or public bid. We need to award the contract with a 4 to 6 lead time for them to deliver the services. And I wanted to thank those companies out there. There are Republic, Waste Management, Mascara, JK, and AMS. I was talking to very extensively to learn the trash pickup business, and I wanted to thank them for their time and effort. Summary, the final slide of the presentation is the summary. In-house operations, if we do in-house operations, we will put the operation on the transportation department because we will be using our transportation drivers to pick up the trash. And our dispatchers will be taking the service calls from our schools, and our drivers will be obviously operating the machines. The contract, we're gonna need two different contracts. We're gonna need to have one landfill contract to take the trash out to Marple Transfer Station, a recycling contract to take the recycling items to South Philly. And we're gonna obviously need a truck and dumpsters. And the lead time is between 7 to 10 months. Mostly because we need to build a brand new trash truck. Initial cost, we expect that to be about $330,000. Annual cost, we expect that to be annual operating cost to be between $155,000 to $175,000. But only if everything goes smoothly. Whenever you have any trucks down, we expect to incur between $3,000 to $5,000 a day cost to pick up our trash. For contracted services, if we are outsourcing the contracted services, the responsibility will fall on the facilities management. Our facility secretaries will be servicing the calls to support the schools. And for contract, we just need one contract with a service contractor. We don't need any equipment. Actually, we're gonna have to get rid of our old equipment, our dumpsters, so the trash pickup companies can provide their own dumpsters. The lead time is between 4 to 6 weeks. Mostly because they need to build the dumpsters and deliver to our sites. Initial cost is none. Annual cost, we got ballpark figures from 5 different companies. It was between high 200s to mid 500s. So we feel $300,000 is a proper budget amount at this time. So 3 major considerations here. So convenience, cost, and control. Convenience, obviously, if you contract out, it's going to be very easy for the school district to handle this, and it's going to be a turnkey operations. There are many qualified companies out there that can help us. But cost, we expect annual cost to be $155,000 for in-house operations and $300,000 for contracted services, with a caveat that whenever our trucks is down, we need to cover $3,000 to $5,000 a day. The control and the customer service. Being able to have our own truck and getting the trucks to our schools in a minute's notice is a great thing. And whenever we have any kind of major projects, we want to be able to use our trucks to handle those operations too. So tonight, this evening, we are making a recommendation to actually issue an RFP to get the final, like a firm numbers from our the trash pickup companies, so we can make the decision very shortly. That concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I believe Dr. Haig has a question.
Thanks, Mr. Fields, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, can you clarify, first of all, that the waste management and the Marple,
Right.
the hub, the two sites that would accept our waste, are those essentially the only two available to us, perhaps because of our size, or are those the ones we anticipate getting the best deal from?
Those are the contracts that the Upper Darby Township has, and we reach out to them based on the contract the Upper Darby Township has. And I believe the Marple station is the only site that we can go. And for the recycling, we also have a North Philly location, but it's about 8 miles farther than the South Philly location. So I was recommending South Philadelphia location.
Sure. Okay. Understood. And then, of course, I'm going to be excited at this opportunity for us to then maybe look into our sustainability practices, because obviously now that we're paying, directly paying the cost, anything that we can do to lower our waste streams, reduce our waste streams, will have an obvious financial impact. And I know it is unfortunate that recycling is more expensive than trash. And as you noted on the slide, that's of course something that fluctuates with the commodities markets. But I've just wanted to throw out there, and I know it's early stages, so we probably haven't gotten there yet, but I wanted to know if we could be looking into ways to reduce our waste, and maybe even get, say, our environmental science teachers and their classes in on that project, because I know certainly in other schools they've done things like that.
So the business office was in contact with EPA, and the EPA offered to provide the best practice in the recycling services in the school, in K-12 schools. So we will be talking to EPA to get those information and spread it out in our school district.
Sure, and recycling is great, but I'm talking about overall waste reduction as well. I mean, I know that there are, especially now that we've gone one-to-one with technology, I'm sure that's going to impact certain consumables that may be used less in the classroom, things like that. So I'm just looking even just at my own, I teach at Temple, and when we actually made a concerted effort, we realized there were a lot of things that we were buying that we didn't really need, that we could either replace with reusable items or get rid of entirely. And I would love it. I understand that this is not a massive line item in terms of our budget, but considering that it is having a financial impact on us, and also, we want to be good environmental stewards, it would be great if we could look a little bit further into that. I know you're all incredibly busy though.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haig. To follow up with that, and like you said on slide 5, recycling it's a global market, and that price is set globally, and it's not something we have a lot of control over as far as how much we have to pay to have our items recycled. I think Dr. Haig raises a good point in that, we're one-to-one with computers right now. I know it seems silly, but maybe we need to be one-to-one with reusable, water cups, right? Instead of having plastic water bottles recycled and that kind of thing. It's certainly worth looking at, but I do appreciate how busy Mr. Lee and the entire team is, but it is something to think about. I do believe we have another question from Ms. Dawes. Go ahead, Leah.
Good evening. Thank you, Don. No question, just a comment, or just to kind of follow up with what you and Dr. Haig were mentioning. As a part of the PSBA weekly discussion, they presented to us a company called Advanced Energy Solutions, who works with schools on best practices on reducing their carbon footprint, as well as other things that are environmentally friendly. Not to get too much into detail with it, I believe the leadership will be passing this on to Brandon Lee to look further into. But there are things within the educational network that can help us sort through those questions. They're relevant. They're not just limited to our school, and there are people out there or consultants that look at those best practices. And a message.
Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you, Ms. Dawes. Mr. Neal has a question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Fields. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Lee. My question is regard to on the slides, you have the only two contracts for in-house operations is the landfill contract and the recycling collection contract. But if we need about 7 to 10 months for the truck to be delivered and the dumpsters to be put in place, I believe we would need to sign a contract with a service to provide pickup temporarily, and then also provide a contract, an ongoing contract, in case if our truck breaks down, and then they could come in and sort of fulfill those needs. Is that what you foresee in that situation?
Yes, our first approach is going to be asking our current provider to extend the current services. So we don't have to have a breach contract. If that's not available, we will have a breach contract until the trucks are ready.
Okay. And in regards to the front loader dumpsters, is there accessibility at all locations for such dumpsters?
That's true. So we talked to experts in the industry, and the front loader vehicle is a lot more maneuverable in the very tight space. So we feel that the front loader is a better suit for our operations.
But I mean, at the school properties where the dumpsters would be housed, would they be accessible to the truck instead of a person walking back and forth with bags?
So we consulted with at least 5 companies, and 3 companies actually did a site visit to see whether that's feasible, and they said they were feasible. So we believe that could be that's possible. That's feasible.
Okay. And any maintenance that would be done, would that be done by our current maintenance department, or would that have to be contracted out because of the specialized equipment involved?
So transportation department has 4 maintenance, the vehicle mechanics. So any basic maintenance will be done by our transportation department, but any specialty items will be outsourced or have the company come into our site to address the issue.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Yep.
Ms. Mitchell has a question.
Is there any concern with the in-house operations? I think I'm reading this correctly. We would only be purchasing 1 truck. So is there any concern? What would we do if that truck were to break down for more than 1 day?
So that's the one of the biggest concerns that we have in our operations, because the truck will go down. This is a certainty. If the truck will go down, we will have to have incur the cost. So that's going to be like one of the major evaluation point when we receive the actual proposals from the trash pickup companies. So we will take that into consideration when we evaluate that.
So just to add to that, and that's when Marvin was presenting our cost versus the projected contractor cost, there's 2 things to take into consideration. And this leads into why we're making the recommendation we are tonight. One is on the district side of operating in-house. What you have to consider is that breakdown time that is unknown. So if you quickly do the math, and Marvin kind of threw it in there real quick, it could be $5,000 a day. You're talking, if it goes down for a week or 2, $25,000 to $50,000. So when you look at the cost savings for the district to run the operations themselves versus what a contractor is offering, that's completely covered, right? The contractor can send out various trucks at any time. It quickly could eat into the potential savings that we're projecting out. And again, we're in the business of educating kids, not collecting trash. So this has been quite the exercise for us to go through, and I think Marvin is somewhat humble right now because he came to me today and said, I never knew I was going to know so much about collecting trash. And he's been able to have these conversations with the actual contractors that do this for a living, and he's built quite the rapport with them in a short period of time. So that conversation that just happened there and the relationship he's built with these contractors pretty quickly led us to take a different approach on how we want to recommend the board move forward. And that is go out immediately and do an RFP and get true hard prices, because we actually believe the $300,000 is going to come down, shrink the gap of the potential savings. If that truly does happen, the recommendation likely will be to go out to a contractor, to a professional to do this service due to the added risk, the unknowns. If the prices come in where they were on the, like, somewhat of a quote level, which is what Marvin really did, the initial research, if those prices don't come down, then our recommendation then may be to move in this direction where we take on the responsibility of collecting, with the idea that the savings is there, even with a buffer of potentially, a downtime of anywhere from a week or two in a given year. As you move further into the operations and your truck ages, right? In the beginning, you wouldn't expect that as much because it's a brand new truck. There's still going to be issues to work through. But as the truck ages, you're definitely going to see the likelihood of a runoff or some kind of bridge contract or a daily contract come into play. So we're trying to take that into consideration and not look at a short term and try and look out. If the life of the truck's really 10, 15 years, we have to look out the likelihood of what's the cost over that time frame and where we could be. So that's a very good question as far as the downtime, but that's the one question that Marvin and I had in-house with our team, Joe McGilvery, Tim Leaf, and Forrest Tarver, where we all bounce around these ideas of where we are. And I will give our team a ton of credit because, we have a great rapport, and the pushback and juxtaposition of ideas is great. But we also have our leadership who is ready to take on anything and willing to take on a new challenge. So some are very excited about the prospect of taking this on internally, and others aren't. So it's great to be able to try and go back and forth and then link the data to and financially where we land with that.
I think one of my other concerns is really, we know the challenges that we have with our bus drivers and call outs and things like that, pre-pandemic. And, we know that sometimes we need all hands on deck to get our students back and forth to school. So just the thought of consideration when we're talking about costs, if we can't get our kids to school or get the trash picked up, we might have to make some choices,
So if you, and I don't know if Marvin can go back to the slide where he shows the timing right there. The plan is to not have to take away from that piece, because like I just said, obviously our main function here is educating students, and transportation's, the first and last contact point of any child being transported by the district every day. So the idea would be to be able to build it in as that extra day, a midday run. So it would be the same driver who was already on site, not taking away from the transportation of the students. And that was absolutely one of the considerations. One of our team members, a major pushback of what happens on, ironically enough, during football season, a Monday is a major call out. And those are the type of things we have to consider, being able to handle the staffing of that.
And snow days and, early dismissal days. I mean, the bus schedules are challenging. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. One of the questions I had was in investigating the purchased trucks, what is the, for lack of a better term, the warranty commitment from the dealer? It just seems odd to talk about it this way, but what have they indicated like they cover or address or help with in their first few years of ownership of this equipment?
So the Costa vendor did provide a quote with the warranty information, but I unfortunately don't have that information in front of me, but I can get back to you with that information. I'm sorry.
Okay, I mean, it could be like any other kind of warranty where the stuff that breaks isn't covered and the stuff that never breaks is. So that's just a point of curiosity on my part. Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers, if there's no other questions, Mr. Rogers, should we move to the next topic?
Yes, and we're loading that presentation now. Just bear with us for a second.
Okay. Well, I'd like to mention that if we could sell Upper Darby toy trucks, like the way that Hess sells trucks, that could be fun.
It could be a district-wide fundraiser.
See? Yeah, right, a district-wide, we'd fund that district-wide Home and School Association right away with that. That and the reusable water bottles. All with UD branding.
So our next agenda item is the facilities update. And we are loading the presentation right now. All right, so Marvin, go to the next slide. So at this point, I'm going to hand over a quick overview to Dr. McGarry to run through.
Sure. So I just want to make sure that we're okay. There's a on the screen. Is that so we wanted to give an update to the public on where we are with several of our projects and facilities projects at this time. In fact, we had a conversation with our teachers union today and our other union leadership today about reviewing this information. We will do so again, not just the projects on grander facilities, but building improvements, window improvements, and the other details that we're improving here in the school district in the upcoming months. This evening, we simply wanted to provide an update on some very significant projects that we have. First, the Aronimink renovation and addition project. We recently found out that a court determination came back to the Upper Darby School District in the school district's favor, where we issued a bond to the neighbors who were looking to take us to court, or we are in court, over the appeal for the process for the Aronimink project. And at this time, the judge has ruled in our favor that if that were to move forward, that the neighbors involved in that project would have to take out a bond for over $1 million. So for all intents and purposes, we feel that the Aronimink project, renovation and addition, is something that's still very much a project that the school district will continue to move forward with in order to ease overcrowding in the school district. And that's important because as we go through tonight's presentation, you'll hear from Mr. Salerno that even with the Aronimink renovation and addition, we still need a new elementary school. And even with a new elementary school and an addition and renovation to Aronimink, we may not be able to meet all of our goals of having kindergarten through 5th grade elementary schools in the school district. With that said, we're still in court over Clifton Heights, the Clifton Heights Middle School project. Dr. Manfrey and I meet pretty regularly. We are in conversations, continue to be in conversations with the borough. And now we are working with a judge on that project. Again, we are still continuing to move forward. We have every belief that the Clifton Heights Middle School project will become a reality here in the Upper Darby School District. We need that project to ease overcrowding in our middle schools. In addition to that, tied directly to the Aronimink renovation and addition project and the need for a new elementary school, the administration has to get out of what is currently called Upper Darby Central Administrative Offices, which are located in the Aronimink Elementary School building. At this time, we are moving forward on a project called 8201 Lansdowne Avenue. That's essentially the address for where we currently have our transportation offices and our buses. Creatively, thanks to the hard work of Craig Rogers, his team, Tim Leaf, Craig Harnachek, and Marvin Lee, and Joe McGilvery, they've creatively put together a plan and working with architects to be able to renovate the existing building located at 8201 Lansdowne Avenue, move central offices to that facility, not expand the footprint of that facility, still keep transportation there, and really open up space at Aronimink Elementary School, much needed space that could either help us ease overcrowding in current elementary schools or move the kindergarten center students there. Those conversations will continue to come up throughout this project. Nonetheless, all of this still leads to the need for a new elementary school somewhere in the school district. And tonight you'll hear about the potential for us to review a location owned by the school district called Cardington Field, a property that at one time did have an elementary school. In the early 80s was the last time that elementary school existed there. So again, quickly, the Aronimink renovation and addition, we are still working toward that project becoming a reality. That project is tied very much in with our 8201 Lansdowne Avenue renovation project that you'll be hearing more about moving forward. And we still need an elementary school here in the school district, a potential site in Cardington. I don't know if anybody else from the team needs to add anything. If not, we can certainly move forward, Mr. Rogers. Or Mr. Solano, you're going to pick up from here? Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. I am going to specifically discuss the option or the consideration of potentially building an elementary school, as Dr. McGarry mentioned, at the current Cardington Field location. I just want to give a quick overview for the public and the board of our objectives for our facilities work that Dr. McGarry just reviewed. We are looking to make sure that we have all kindergarten classes at half day, but also to have as many kindergarten classrooms or programs as possible throughout the district in neighborhood schools. That is still an objective of ours. Like Dr. McGarry mentioned, and I'm going to review this just in a few minutes here with some of the slides, but using Cardington Field as a potential location, while it does satisfy and meet some of our objectives, one of the things we could potentially fall a bit short on is having kindergarten in all of our schools. And that really comes down to the fact that we can only build the schools so large at the site at Cardington Field. And that being said, there's potential that some of our schools are not going to be K-5 and would have to be 1 to 5 schools. However, it is still an objective of ours to get K-5 programming in all of our elementary schools. No modular classrooms to be used. We have a number of modular classrooms throughout the district. That is a goal of ours, to make sure that we no longer have a reliance or dependence on our modular classrooms. We want to make sure that we are adhering to our educational specifications. Specifically, we are talking about our class size averages there, both at the elementary and the secondary level. We would like to redistrict with the least amount of impact and provide opportunities for students and families to be able to participate in activities in neighborhood schools. And that leads me to, I think, one of the most important objectives, and that is to discontinue the need to lease buildings that the school district does not own. We are currently leasing 2 buildings. Charles Kelly is a school building that we are leasing currently. It's a 1 to 5 building. And we have been leasing that school for 14 years now. And we initiated that lease out of a concern of enrollment and capacity, specifically as it relates to Charles Kelly for Stonehurst Hills and Highland Park. And that was 14 years ago. It fulfilled an immediate need, an enrollment and capacity issue, and here we are 14 years later, still leasing that building and having students attend Charles Kelly well outside of their neighborhood, albeit within the boundary or the border of Upper Darby School District. Walter Senko Elementary School is a school that we have been leasing for the last 16 years. And not only is that a school that we do not own as a school district, but it is a school that that is outside of the district border. It is in Glen Olden, and that school was decided on as a site 16 years ago, really to reduce the overcrowding and enrollment concerns that we had at Bywood Elementary School at the time. And again, that was 16 years ago. Now we find ourselves in a situation 16 years later in the case of Senko and 14 years later in the case of Kelly, where we are still up against enrollment and capacity issues at Bywood Elementary School, at Highland Park Elementary School, and many of the same schools that we attempted to address the concerns by leasing these properties outside of the school district and buildings that we do not own. So that leads us to our conversation, again, about Senko being a priority. You can see on the map here on this particular slide, if you don't mind going back one more, I'm sorry. You can see here on the map, not this map, if we can go back to the Senco map, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. We are officially jumping around here, I'm sorry. If we can go to the Senco Elementary School map, where it shows the map and the gymnasium and cafeteria. Thank you, I appreciate it. You can see that just the distance that our students are traveling from their neighborhood. I just pin marked a specific address here of a residence that would potentially travel if they had school-age children in grades 1 through 5 to Senco Elementary School, and depending on traffic and conditions, road conditions at the time, our students are on the bus for upwards of 30 minutes each way to and from school to Senco. The proposed site of Cardington Field, while it's a very small map here, this isn't the intention of the map, it literally would be a stone's throw away from this particular address that students would be able to walk to. So this site does, while it's not as large as some of the other sites that we were looking at, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. It does meet our needs in terms of it being in the exact location that we are really looking for to be able to bring our students back into the school district. You can see Cardington Field on the north side of this map here, and this is just to illustrate that Upper Darby School District has explored a number of different options. And one of those being 69th Street Field. You can see that on the lower end, the south end of this map here. Unfortunately, we somewhat recently discovered that the 69th Street Field, as you can see illustrated here in this map, is situated right in the middle of a floodplain. So after very careful consultation with our architects from KCBA, which are also on the call, Mr. Mike Kelly and Mr. Ryan Orr, they're going to be jumping on in just a minute here. We decided that this was not the best site option for us, given the fact that 69th Street Field is situated right on a floodplain, albeit a larger site, not a really viable option for us, which led us to the option of looking further into Cardington Field as a potential site for an elementary school. Next slide, please. So you can see here that this proposed catchment area map, you can see in the northeast corner of the map here, the proposed Cardington site, and you can see represented by the white bold lines on this map, those are our current elementary school catchment areas. In the shaded areas, using the key on the bottom right-hand side of this map, you can see the proposed catchment areas with the renovation and expansion of Aronimink Elementary School and the construction of the new elementary school at the Cardington Field location. And that area right in the heart of the proposed Cardington Field site there, that white outline, is currently the catchment for Senco Elementary School. So this proposed school would include all of the students who currently attend Senco Elementary School, with the exception of a very small area that is currently in yellow on this map, or green, depending if you're looking on YouTube or on my screen in front of me here. That area would go to Garrettford, but the majority of our Senco students would go to this new elementary school. We would also pull from students that currently attend Charles Kelly, students that attend Bywood, and so this site would really do a great deal of assistance to the school district and help us to alleviate the overcrowding at Bywood, at Stonehurst, at Highland Park, in addition to the renovation and addition at Aronimink Elementary School. Next slide, please. At this point in time, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mr. Mike Kelly. He's going to very quickly walk through just some of the talking points, some of the conversations that we have been having with the community about this location. We are in the very beginning phases of having these conversations and engaging the community in this conversation about a potential elementary school on this site. And Mr. Kelly is going to take you through some of the considerations as we look further into this as a possibility. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Salerno, and thank you, everyone, for having us tonight. We're excited to be back to talk to you about some continuing efforts here in the district to improve some of your facilities. The next couple of slides are from a neighborhood, we called it a listening session, that we shared with the neighborhood residents back on the 11th of this month. We're actually going to meet again tomorrow to talk with some residents around this, the field and the community area in Clifton about some conversations of the project, making sure that people understand what the school is and really start to get some comments back from neighbors about any concerns they may have ahead of time as we look to develop the site for the students of the Cardington area. As you can see on this map, but one of the nice exciting things about this property is it's right in the middle of a huge neighborhood. I grew up in a very a similar situation, and my school was right down the street, had a great place to come and play as well. So there's a lot of great opportunities for this site as we look to develop not only the building itself, but potential play areas and areas for students around the community. So if you go to the next slide, obviously starting to analyze this property, and you can go again to the next piece where the streets show up. And one more, please. You can see Walnut Street down below and Sansom Street above, and to the left is 69th Street. So we know a lot of the traffic may be coming along these two roads. So one of the considerations was, well, where do we put the building? Everybody's always concerned, obviously, about traffic and where buses and cars may be coming from. So we wanted to do a couple of quick studies on the site. So if you look at the very next slide, please, this kind of shows the existing site. And it says, all right, we've got almost 4 acres, which is a good size. It's a little small, but we think we can still fit the required parking, the school, and some play areas available there. And we came up with a few options. So if you go through the next slide here and click the next piece of that, when the little arrows show up there. This was an option saying, well, maybe we build the building along Sansom. We put the parking in the middle. We have some open space closer to the cemetery area. And that's really kind of the 3 main components of this site. You're going to have the school building, you're going to have the parking area, and we're going to try to create and maintain as much open space as possible. So here, if we have parking in the middle, all of the anybody driving from 69th Street and turning onto either Sansom or Walnut are also kind of coming up the side street, the residential street, into the middle of the parking, the middle of the site for parking there. So if you go to the next slide, and you can click twice there and show that again. If we move that site and go down and say, all right, well, let's move the building closer to the cemetery and the open space further to the north, a little bit closer to where the rest of the residents are. That seems to make some sense because we like the open space to the north where most of the residential areas are. But with parking in the middle, we still have people driving down the side residential streets there. So if you go to the next option, here we said, all right, well, maybe the building is back in the middle again, but we put parking up on Sansom. Now, if we have parking directly off of one of the main streets, we're then taking it off one of the other main streets. We're not coming through the 2 residential side streets there as much. So this was an option. And then the fourth option, which we believe to be, if you keep going to the next 2 pieces there you go, which we believe to be the one of most merit. What we saw here are the open space along Sansom, the building in the middle, and now parking directly along Walnut. So essentially, vehicular traffic or buses, and we think buses are actually going to be very limited here because we have so many walkers in the area, which we're going to touch on in a moment, that this seemed like the best location for the parking area, adjacent across from the cemetery. And we kind of laughed and said, the cemetery, people there don't complain as much. So maybe that's the best place to put parking there. So these were some of the discussions that we started to have with the neighbors and some of the participants in our meeting 2 weeks ago there, of just where should the building sit and how to maximize some of the open space. So the next slide there, actually the next two you can kind of go right through, show those four options. So we talked a bit about the site, then we talked about the school. So if you go to the next slide, you have a big school building. Typically that, and if you go to the next slide, that's composed of two main portions. If you click two more times there, you have kind of academics area, and what we're showing in yellow here is really the kind of common space that's utilized by everyone in the school, and then has opportunities for school-related meetings, things like back to school nights or parent nights that could happen in the library or the cafeteria. So you want those areas that could be used for academic purposes by the community after hours to be located towards the front of the school building. So we were kind of showing how that would kind of look to organize how the new school would be created. So if you go to the next slide, that'll show you what we meant by some of those common spaces in yellow there. You see the gym, you see the cafeteria, spaces like that could be used for school board meetings, perhaps. And the very next slide then shows kind of the development of what we would look to do for basically kindergarten through fifth grade, or creating enough spaces there. So we started to kind of break down the building components and had a nice kind of conversation about what type of amenities and things should be available to the students. So the last part of that conversation, if you go to the next slide, was the open space. So again, we talked about the site, we talked about where the building would go, we talked about the building itself. We said, all right, well, with this open space, what should we put back there? There's a nice little playground space there now, but this is a large area. We think we can maximize a fairly large space on that property. Is that a one giant large playground space? We're showing here kind of maybe playground equipment for older kids. Maybe on the right, it's playground equipment for younger kids. Maybe in the middle, there's some turf area. Now, this would be a very small little field, but that could be an area for play that's not just grass, so that it drains a little bit better. The orange there was kind of showing a little bit of maybe a walking track. If you go to the next slide, we said, well, maybe that idea is nice, but we make that a little smaller so it's part for the kids and part for the adults. So I could bring a child there, can swing on the swing, and I can go over and sit on that bench and under a tree and read a book. So if you go to the next slide, that just shows, again, the options that we were showing there. So the purpose of all of this was kind of, and if you can go to the next slide, purpose of all of that was saying we're very early in the planning stages. We're looking to get input from the elementary school principals, from the administrators, certainly from the board, but we're also in this great opportunity of listening to the neighbors in that area to ask them what they think would be best. What's so nice about this, and again, it's similar to Clifton, this school is being built in an area for those children that live in that area. So their kids are going to be going to that school. I thought that was a really nice slide that Mr. Salerno showed earlier to show where this building sits, those students are going to directly benefit. So that was really the purpose of these listening sessions. We wanted to talk to them as well about creating safe recreational areas, safe areas for the building itself to be placed. We'd be working certainly with school district officials and township officials, as well with the local police department, as things get more and more involved in the project. We see a lot of times placing schools really kind of resonates out safety. That's going to be an area that a lot of people are looking at. There's going to be lights in the parking lot. There's going to be lights on the building. Now you're starting to create something here that brings people, and a lot of times what that does is kind of maybe pushes some of the safety and security concerns away from that site when you develop it with nice attributes like a school and the play areas that we were considering there. We want to make sure that we're creating a visually open recreation space to, again, create that kind of, we call passive surveillance. So if there's a lot of kids, a lot of people playing in that park, certainly there's more eyes on that property, eyes on that area, and that can certainly help with safety. So my last slide there, if you go to the next one, as we mentioned, every project, everybody's always concerned about traffic studies and parking. As we develop this project further, there will certainly be a traffic study That will be conducted for the property and the surrounding streets. Again, what's really, really nice here is we're talking about elementary school students primarily who are walking here. That's why that location is so great for all of those surrounding neighbors. A lot of students would be walking here. And then our charge would be to create adequate on-site parking for basically just the staff and visitors. Obviously, elementary school students don't drive like they would at a high school, so we have a reduced amount of parking that would be required on site. So a lot of great conversations that have started and a lot of nice opportunities here for the development of a school for that community. So, Mr. Solano, I believe you're taking over the next piece here, talking a little bit again about that walkable community.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kelly. As Mr. Kelly did mention that previously in one of the previous slides, that this is predominantly going to be a walking school. So the School District Transportation Department is in communication with PennDOT to review hazardous routes and roads. But right now, this map is just demonstrating the 1 mile walk zone illustrated by the border in pink. And the shaded area represents the proposed Cardington Field and the catchment area for that. So you can see that our students are well within that 1 mile walk radius, and therefore we would have very few buses after we do our review of the hazardous roads. Next slide, please. As Mr. Kelly also mentioned, we've already had one listening session on the 11th of February. We are looking to create more opportunities for community input. We have this meeting this evening, obviously. We have another meeting tomorrow at 6:30. There is a link on the presentation, and we are hopeful that community members continue to come out and give us their input as we continue to refine the plans at this potential site. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick slide giving some of the next steps, and I think it's really important to note here that this is just an absolute best case scenario schedule. This is not anything that we are putting in stone just yet, but this is just a best case scenario schedule in terms of just the community input meetings, review by the school board, planning and approvals that we would need from the township, but as we have talked about here at the district level many times, and as Dr. McGarry has expressed quite often, every school year that we delay these projects and these important initiatives to bring more equitable learning environments to all of our students, that's just one more year that a student potentially could be sitting in an overcrowded classroom, or one more year that a student is sitting on a bus for an hour every day they go to school. So obviously we want to make sure that we're thorough and we want to include the community in these decisions, but there's also obviously a sense of urgency in making sure that we are not having the same conversation 16 years from now about Walter Senko and leasing buildings outside of the school district as we look back 16 years from when we first started leasing that building. Next slide, please. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the board for any questions and then any public comment.
Frank, this is Don. Thank you for your passion and your detail in this. You've covered a lot of good information here. I'm going to hand it over to Dan, Dr. McGarry for now. He has a couple points he'd like to make.
Yeah, and Frank, feel free to jump in on this. I just want to revisit the slide, if you can, that has the community use aspect to it. Nope, too quick. I think it's the next one or two. No, next one. It's the bullet points of community use, if you can find it, just so the public can see it. It's important what we're talking about now. This current location, and there's an image on here. We're confused with the slides. It's all good. This current facility is used a lot for soccer and other recreational uses in that community right now, as we understand it. I think, Mr. Salerno, during the very beginning meetings that you've already been holding, I know Mrs. Buford, and Mrs. Figueroa Douglas, our supervisor for equity, have been walking out in the neighborhoods and talking to the community members about the potential for this project and making sure that we have input and buy-in from the community. And I think one of the things that we've heard in those conversations is that the facility, the outdoor open space, some of that area is important for use for recreational purposes on the weekend. And so as we heard this discussion tonight, as Mike Kelly explained, all of our schools, and this came up with the Aronimink project, unfortunately, all of our schools are used as community resources. Our facilities are used for sports, our outdoor facilities are used for sports. And I think it's important, I appreciate Mike highlighting the fact that this would be a benefit to the community. And sadly, if you look at some of the images on this presentation, the current look of the dirt location, the property, is something we'd be looking to improve by putting a school there. That's important. And then secondly, on this presentation, during this presentation, Frank, you talked about the idea that we would no longer need, working to no longer need the Senko Elementary School in Charles Kelly, but that we would probably miss out on our goals, meaning we would not be able to have kindergarten through 5th grade schools. And since I know you're so, into the details and working on this project a lot, can you just make sure that you walk everybody through who would remain at the kindergarten center and why would we need the kindergarten center space?
Yeah, unfortunately, Dr. McGarry, again, there was a conversation, if we reflect back to the public meetings that we were having about the Aronimink renovation and expansion. Some of the public comments that we were receiving had to do with just build a school on the eastern side of the school district to alleviate the concern where the overcrowding is. Why here was some of the comments and commentary that we were hearing. And time again, we expressed that just build it. While we do need a school on the eastern side of the school district, an elementary school, that alone is not going to solve our issues. So it's a combination of all of these. It has always been a three-legged step stool. Aronimink renovation and expansion being a part of that, Cardington Field or an elementary school somewhere in the district being a part of that, and the middle school being a part of that. That has always been a part of the facilities conversation that we have had. Our hope was that we were going to be able to build an elementary school on a site such as 69th Street that would be able to accommodate more students, upwards of potentially 700 to 750 students capacity, and that's just not possible at the Cardington site. It's a great location, it's just a smaller site. Therefore, our hope is that we're building this school for a capacity of about 600 students. We're projecting an enrollment a little bit north of 500 students when the school is complete. But we don't know that we're going to have enough space, classroom space and capacity to be able to accommodate kindergarten at this particular school based on the need to have Charles Kelly students and Walter Senko students come back into the school district, and also for this school to absorb some of the overcrowding and enrollment concerns that we were having at Bywood. Therefore, this school would not be unfortunately, a K-5 school, at least to start, in some of our initial planning. Additionally, Highland Park Elementary and capacity concerns at Highland Park, we don't know that we are going to be able to do it to the extent that we are going to be able to offer kindergarten programming at a school like Highland Park. So a lot of this depends on our enrollment projections and how we're projecting out these numbers. Talking about kindergarten, and specifically half-day kindergarten, we're talking about classroom space too. So it's not just about the enrollment, but the class. So our hope is that we can get to that goal of including K-5 programming in all of our schools, but in some of our planning right now as it looks for the size of this school, still wanting to protect the green space and that community use aspect. We don't want the entire site to be an elementary school. We could very easily take over 3/4 or more of that property and build a larger school, but that would not be valuing some of the input that we're hearing from the community about the community use, about the need to have some green space there. So we're going to continue to work towards that goal, but right now it's looking like this school, Highland Park, we're not going to be able to accomplish our objectives 100% with respect to kindergarten.
Thank you, Mrs. Salerno. I believe Mrs. Mitchell has a question.
Yes, I do. I know I had attended, along with some other board members, the first community meeting, and there was some mention about a soccer field and how important it is to that community. But I think an elementary school would have to have a playground, and there would be limited field space there. I see it's not in the presentation, so I'm assuming we can't really accommodate a full-size soccer field and a playground and a building for 600 students and parking that's required, I think, 3 parking spots per classroom. Correct?
I see we're going back to the slide here. There you go. This open space option that Mr. Kelly was referring to, and I'll allow him to jump in if he wants, but this is about the size of a soccer field, the entire site here, this area. So it's not going to be possible to have a regulation size soccer field and a playground on it. So that's why we're showing options of having a smaller soccer field and incorporating that playground aspect as well.
I appreciate all the hard work you guys are putting into this. There's such limited space in Upper Darby Township to accommodate the needs of the school district because we're really overbuilt. But one of the other concerns that I have is that we have a lot of projects going on, potential projects going on right now. And I'm just wondering what's going to happen if all the green lights come on for all these projects at the same time. I realistically, I'm not sure the district can afford to do Aronimink, Cardington, a middle school, and 8201 all at the same time. And I just wondered where we are with that. I mean, I know there's been a lot of litigation delays, but I thought it was something that we should probably have a conversation about tonight.
So I'll jump in as a superintendent because I think it's important from my leadership and then pass it over to everybody else. I mean, I think this board and many of the community members have really set out to create a plan. And one of the goals when we took over the facilities work, it feels like forever ago, was to meet these goals and these objectives and to improve the facilities. And the administration and the board delivered on that plan. It's no fault of a student. It's no fault of this board that, there are delays in meeting those goals. Does it mean some of the timing of these projects will change? Yes. Originally, we looked at trying to stagger this appropriately. We have potentially missed out on significantly very low interest rates on the middle school planning. Nonetheless, Craig and I will certainly have conversations and meet with our bond counsel on these projects. Positive still continues to be Upper Darby School District has a very low debt. And we're still in a good financial position regarding the debt that we have. I think it's going to come down to a conversation that, on one hand, it's not the end of the world that we're able to move forward with a middle school project and we're renovating and expanding Aronimink Elementary School. I do want to be clear, and I think Mr. Salerno is working unbelievably hard on top of his day-to-day jobs, as Greg, Dr. Manfrey is. What's unique about this site, too, is that we have to go through a whole zoning process. This is just very slow preliminary discussions on the Cardington property. And while we hesitate showing a timeline, I think we show the timeline here tonight to say, as an administration and as a board, I know you know this, every year, as Mr. Salerno said, that goes by, the kids are in overcrowded classrooms or bust non-English speakers almost an hour every day, and their parents struggle to be able to get to the school to engage, whether a student's sick or it's a home and school meeting, although we try to do the best. We hear these meetings and the conversations up at Darby Rising, and people want this to happen and to build the schools and the sacrifices there. We recognize that we don't want to overwhelm the community in taxes, and we don't want to put the board in that situation. So we're going to go through a whole review of what we can and can't do. But we're also at a point now where we have these projects on the table, and they're needed. They're needed. And every time we push it off, kids go through. I just felt Ed Brown next to me, and I feel like we're in a place to say this, where when kindergarten can't be put at Highland Park, that's upsetting. That's another transition that kids have to have in their life. That's another part of a community where certain kids transition more than other kids. That's not what we're here to do. We should try to meet these goals to the best of our ability and put a plan in place. And I'm confident that we're going to launch these plans not on the timeline we originally had hoped. And it's no fault of this team trying to make that happen. There's things that have gotten in the way. But we're going to work on putting a financial plan to make as many of these projects happen as possible within reason. Craig?
And Dan touched on the debt level of the district. We are still in a very, very good position as far as our debt level. The original plan was built off of what's called lapping. So you build in stronger payments on the newer issuance of debt as the other ones come off. And what that does is decreases the impact on the tax base, how much the board actually has to increase taxes because it's an annual increase to your budget. We're still in a great position. Remember, we didn't borrow, just like the projects are delayed, we delayed how much money we borrowed. So although we had planned to borrow more money early on, and to Dan's point, we missed out on those interest rates, not borrowing as much as we really could have. But at the end of the day, the district has a strong borrowing base and a large amount that is available to be borrowed. What it's going to come down to is sticking to what we also were trying to do and minimize the annual impact to a budget increase. I still believe that we're in a situation, I don't believe each of these projects are going to start on the same day in the same school year, which still positions us in a way that we can layer those debt issuances over multiple years. So our original plan was very sound, and we're rolling with, the change to the schedule, and we still do have an amazing availability of to be able to issue debt.
That's good news because we've been waiting 14 to 16 years for these projects to really come to fruition. So I'm glad to hear that. It just feels overwhelming when we just had, we talked about a bond issuance, and I know there was a lot of concerns from the community about the taxes. And, that's in the front of my mind, and I'm sure all board members. So it's just something that I think we ought to, talk about every so often, because it looks like a lot.
Sure, and the only thing I will add is somewhat of the logistics. When you add that many projects, the manpower it takes to coordinate them and make sure that they're moving forward in a very smooth process. And that's where the district will explore either construction management firms or potentially clerk of the works. We have been over this entire time researching our options. Because of those delays, we hadn't made a quicker decision because we weren't going to try and incur costs when we were unsure of the schedules. But our team, Marvin and my team, have done a ton of research, and that will be something that's coming up as the projects start to kick off, bringing in professionals to be able to manage on-site the logistics of really seeing those projects through.
All for your hard work and many, many hours in addition to everything else that you have to do to try to get this going. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Board Director Don. I have a couple questions and a comment. I'm going to make one comment, and then I'm going to send it to David Neal, who will also make a comment. But my comment at this moment is that it is not the district's fault that our projects got held up in court, and neither is it the fault of our students or the students' families that are counting on this district to make these updates and complete these projects so that we are better suited to provide a quality education in modern facilities. I think the immediate benefits of project completions will create more positive feedback than any negatives we might receive, and those would be short-term negatives. Mr. Neal, you'd like to make a comment?
Yeah, are you finished? I thought you said you had a...
I had a few more, but I'll go after you.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right. My comment was just based off of, future planning, and I know, Dr. McGarry, you had mentioned it, and I believe Craig and Frank mentioned it as well. We need, space. The more space, the better. And I'm talking school space, right? Classrooms. Um, was there any look into expanding the building size at Cardington either up or wider, than maybe including an underground parking, um, that instead of wasting space on ground level for cars, we could utilize it for the community and have the field and a small playground with some on-ground parking with underground parking as well, and expand the elementary school so it's a little bit larger. Um, were those options considered?
Frank, I can try to jump in and answer that. I think we're considering already a three-story school that would be placed on the site. So we're already going to look to maximize or minimize the building footprint as much as we can, and build up to a three-story elementary school. We have a similar school going on right now in Haverford at Linwood, which is a three-story new elementary school. The parking, we're obviously going to try to reduce as much as possible as well, than the required number of spaces. But doing anything as a parking garage or anything underground really becomes cost prohibitive. It's actually very expensive. There's a lot of building codes and fresh air intakes and security issues with having parking underneath buildings. So that would, unfortunately, I think, be a bit cost prohibitive. But to your point, our goal is to minimize the footprint of the school, minimize the footprint of the parking area, to then maximize the open space that's provided. As was mentioned, it's still going to be a large. Right now, I mean, it's 3.8 acres of complete open space, but you may be looking at well over an acre of clear open space there, in that open space that we can still maintain for the community and the neighbors around that. So I think we'd still be able to develop quite a nice community play space, garden area in the northern side of that property.
Okay, thank you. And would a basement be considered for school use? You know, whether just for employees and staff members and/or students?
Yeah, there could certainly be, and part of the first part of the investigation of that study will be a geotechnical test. We'll look at the subsurface conditions. It's certainly, from we know of that area, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be prohibited to build basement space. A lot of times we use that for storage and mechanical space, so that again you can have more of the offices and areas where people are going to be throughout the day on the first floor, so we can get natural light, things like that, into their spaces. But then put all the boilers and the hot water heaters and all the storage and things like that underground in a basement space. So again, that's a good point, and another strategy we'll use to minimize the footprint of the building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. I got a question, then a couple comments. Are we investigating? Are we looking for a waiver from the township on the 3 spots per classroom rule, allowing for a smaller lot and maybe more space for the building or for the green space? This is probably something we could have used at Aronimink. Alternatively, if we have a lot that typically has extra spaces available, would we be in position to offer some spots up on Fridays for parking overflow from the nearby mosque? And I ask this because I think.
So I'll start and say, great ideas. First, we always have to go into these plans and these process trying to meet the current zoning and the current ordinances that are in place. As we work through that project, I know Mike and Ryan will work with us as we bring the other engineers on board to review this, and Frank and I talk about these things all the time. Our ultimate goal is to try to design a plan that meets the current ordinances. Again, remember that we're going into a process right now, probably one of the more limited in what we're up against, not limited in making it easy. I'm sorry, I'm not using the right word, I'm tired, but it's more restrictive right now. Like this property is not zoned for use by a school. It's recreational. So we have a lot of hurdles to overcome even to put a school on this location. where at Aronimink, it was our property, it already has a school. Technically, when we put in our project ahead of time, before Clifton Heights changed, what we believe changed some of their ordinances, it was zoned and we could have put a school there. Carrington is not zoned for a school. And then to go into that and ask for that to change is going to be a lot of work. On top of that, the 3 parking spaces per classroom is currently in that ordinance, and we would probably start out with, putting a plan in place to make that. For a lot of reasons. One, because of home and school type of situations or parking or events that would take place there. But if that's a conversation we can work toward, that would be great. As far as use and parking there, and I certainly don't want to open up a can of worms here. Whenever it snows in the school district, in the community, we have significant problems currently at Bywood Elementary School and Stonehurst Elementary School. The way that those buildings are situated, that when it snows, and I get it, there's limited parking, I know, Mr. Fields, to your point, in those areas. The problem then becomes that the community has a tendency to park around the school community. And our staff, our maintenance team cannot plow. And then we have an issue where we can't park. Our staff literally can't come to school at Stonehurst or Bywood and park in the spaces. That then becomes a situation where we have to have the staff at Bywood Elementary School park on the playground so that now kids, if we can get kids in with a little bit of snow and removed, the faculty is now parking on the playground area, and the kids at Bywood and often at Stonehurst then can't go out during recess, which creates an issue with staff, that they are now not getting that time that they need during the day because the students are indoors, they can't go outdoors. In other school communities, they are. We want to be careful not to recreate the same concerns that we're facing at Stonehurst, the same concerns that we're facing at Bywood. I know Board President Brown's aware of this because we get called. We are now in a situation where at times we have to tow neighbors away from Stonehurst, away from Bywood, because our faculty literally can't park in those spaces and we can't plow. We try to reach out, we try to do it. So we don't want to create an adversarial relationship. It's certainly a conversation, Mr. Fields, but I do want to be clear tonight in this conversation to be careful that we have to be very careful opening ourselves up and repeating the same patterns of behaviors. Frank, anything you want to add to any of that?
No, I think you did a great job of explaining it. I think it's a great question, Mr. Fields. I hear what you're saying too. We have to balance, one of the concerns that we are hearing is about on-street parking and how limited the parking is in that area right now. So if we have fewer parking spots, and we decide to go for a waiver, potentially are we then increasing that problem that we have there, that we're hearing from the community? If we create the 3 spots per classroom, which would give us approximately 75 parking spots on that site, you're right, potentially we would be able to offer some of those spots to the community if we were able to. We also have to think about things like events at the school too. And while it's predominantly a walking school, if we're having some sort of an assembly or a program, if the community is using it, we want to make sure there's adequate parking for events like that too. So it is a lot to consider. We are doing our best to weigh all of these options, but it's a very good point, and something we will certainly consider as a part of our planning.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate the complexities of this, and when I was thinking about it, I was like, that could create more problems than it resolves. So, but I appreciate you guys thinking about it. The one other question. So we have a few projects that have this as a timeline. Not tonight, obviously, but at some point when we come back to this discussion of facilities updates, our timelines have updated, and if we could get a presentation just on updated timelines for all our projects, and some of them are static, some of them is to be determined, but I think that might be helpful. So people that are looking forward to these things being completed can see, okay, so this is where we are now and stuff like that. If that's clear, right? Just a slide with planned start, planned end, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
For each of our projects.
Mr. Fields, it's a great point. I had a slide like that, to be honest, that is ready to go. But to be honest, we are not at a point right now. While we're excited about our progress with Aronimink and having these conversations about about Cardington, I don't want to put out any dates and then be held to them, or give people false hope, or commit to something that we're not really certain on. But that is something that we most certainly will consider moving forward, and we do have some general thoughts that we will be sharing in the near future.
Right.
I understand that. Like I said, TBD, to be determined, right, is perfectly acceptable for my needs, right? So, but I get that. I think, was someone going to add something, Dr. McGarry?
Mr. Fields, I'm sorry, it was Dr.
Okay,
Manfred.
go ahead.
I was just going
Go
to
ahead.
piggyback on what Frank was saying in terms of Clifton. We are nowhere near being able to put a timetable for when that project begins or is completed. As Dr. McGarry alluded to earlier this evening, we are still in working committees with the Borough of Clifton Heights through Judge Dozier's direction. So hopefully as time goes on, we're optimistic about the Clifton project, but we're going to need to wait to put any kind of timeline together.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Manfred. I guess I'm glad that we are still talking over there. I wanted to make a point that Mrs. Salerno brought up Sencal and Charles Kelly, and all the trailers on all the different campuses, elementary school campuses, and middle school campuses, aside from Aronimink. That Sencal, Charles Kelly, and all these trailers have become permanent temporary solutions. And that, I know I'm probably speaking for a lot of people on this call, that is incredibly frustrating. That is a situation where you're in close to, for some of these top issues, 20 years later. The schools that we're renting are 16 and 14 years, but the trailers, I think I hear all the time, were used when we got them and weren't supposed to be there for as long as they've been there. So we are all looking forward to a time when we don't have to be doing these things that are expensive. I would also like to ask residents of the school district to look at a map of Upper Darby and, Millbourne and Clifton Heights, they're part of the school district as well, and try to find some open space that is not in a floodplain or is not a cemetery. And I would gather you will not find that open space where this district can build. And so what we're doing is we're building where we can build. And this, like the other areas that we're working on, are places where we can build. And we make these improvements here, and then that'll lead to improvements overall for the district. And that's all I have to say. Is unless anybody else has a question or a comment, I think we can move on to the next agenda item. I think we have policies. Go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
Yes, that's correct. We do have 3 policies tonight, and I will hand it over to Mr. Desnoyers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers and School Director Fields. There are 3 policies up for consideration this evening, and again, if the board moves these policies forward and the changes are approved at the March board meeting, they will become effective. So the 3 policies under consideration are Policy 610, purchases subject to bid or quotation, Policy 611, purchases budgeted, and Policy 626, federal fiscal compliance. And the summary of changes is essentially the same for all 3 policies. And that is that each year the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry is required by law to publish changes to the base amounts triggering the requirements for public telephonic bids or separate bids for certain contracts or both. These changes are based on Consumer Price Index and are published annually in the PA Bulletin and reflected in policies 610, 611, and 626 AR2. And basically it just, these changes increase the threshold by a few $100s to keep up with inflation. So that's the end of my comment on policies this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Desnoyers. Again, always thorough and complete. I believe that is everything on our agenda. Are there any, I guess, public comments?
Mr. Fields, there are no public comments.
That's because all these presentations were so thorough and completed and so fantastic. Mr. Rogers, can I have a review of the agenda?
Absolutely. So first up was the initiation of trash removal services, which is board action. The administration is asking the board to move forward with the idea of a RFP to get firm prices on contracting out the trash removal services in order to compare that to our internal evaluation and then make a final decision on moving forward.
Fantastic. Do we have a yes from the board to move this forward?
Sure.
Yes.
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 Sounds good. Fantastic. Go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
Next was the facility update, which was informational. We reviewed the open facilities projects, the Aronimink renovation and addition, Clifton Heights Middle School, the 8201 Lansdowne Ave renovation, and a potential new elementary school on the Cardington Field property. This was informational. Agenda item number 3 were policies, which are board action. 610, purchases subject to bid and quotation. 611, purchases budgeted. And 626, federal fiscal compliance.
Thank you very much. Are we okay moving forward the policy changes?
Yes.
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 Fantastic. Board President Brown, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fields. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Please have a good evening. Good night.
Have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.